Welcome, everybody. So great to have so many of you joining us today for our students' spring internship presentation. We have alumni on the call, supervisors, faculty, students, staff, friends of our program. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Claire, Carol, and our graduate student assistants, Emily Burns and Tiara Dubois, for your help in organizing this. And as you know, this has been quite the challenging year and a half worldwide, and also, of course, to be in graduate school. And, you know, you will hear today about the twists, turns, ups, downs of the experiences of interning during really what have been multiple pandemics globally with COVID, violence, racism, you name it. And for the first year ever in our program, the internship did not involve travel, as you can imagine. We weren't able to send students abroad. So we had some creative things happen to do domestic internships and also some virtual international work, and you'll be hearing all about it. I want to say that we're so proud that our students have been able to persist and complete their degree and their internship during this time. It hasn't been easy for them, but throughout this, they've been able to really utilize each other, faculty, family, friends for support and make it through. The work they've been doing in our program has not only been challenging, but our hope is that in some ways it's been sustaining and they've found ways to advocate for themselves and others along the way. It's been far from a perfect graduate school experience, we realize. Yet I hope that the adversities people have encountered, that we've all gone through, end in lessons for us all, and that they're so relevant to the chosen field of disaster and trauma. I've been in awe of you guys as you've engaged in this last step of our program, and want to thank you for sharing tonight or this afternoon your thoughts about really the outstanding work you've been doing. So today our plan will be, Shelley has some words to say to us, and then Gwen will be giving our Community Supervisor Award. Tiara will orient us to our students' panel presentations, and then Claire will magically get us in our breakout panel rooms. And then we'll get back together at the end, and Emily Burns will close our presentations for us. And then we have an after party for students to celebrate their work together. I also wanted to point out that there are bio pages to check out, and each student has made a page that talks about their work and the impact that their work has had on them, and they're tremendous, so check them out. I think Claire has put that link in the chat. So Shelley, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Judy, and thanks for having me and giving me this opportunity. And probably like the whole year of COVID, I am in a way heartbroken that we can't be together in person. It feels like this is a hard way to do this work, and you guys have had that experience the whole year, that it's just so challenging. So it breaks my heart that we can't be in the same room and have me walking around and looking at your posters and what has happened in the past. And at the same time, honestly, as I'm saying this, I'm getting goosebumps. I could not be more proud of you. The quality of perseverance, persistence, sticking with this, your dedication to this degree, to the work that's being done. But it's not just the dedication, it's the expertise, the skill. It's what I know about what I'm going to hear today is so impressive. All of you were allowed in this program because you want to make the world a better place. You're idealistic, you're hungry to kind of make a difference. But that intent doesn't really translate into impact without a very high level of skill and expertise. And that's what you've pursued in the time that you're here. And I'm so grateful for that and can't wait to hear more. The other mixed feeling experience that I need to talk about is that this will be our last IDP event or program. There's graduation on Friday with Judy as the director. And it's really hard to believe that part of the chapter is coming to an end. However, she's not retiring. She's still going to stay on as faculty. She's still going to be contributing her expertise and really having a chance to first of all, having a chance to pass the torch to Travis and Gwen. And if you all know Judy and her dedication to the program, she would not step down if she couldn't step down, leaving the program in good hands. And she has done so much work over the past probably 3 years in thinking about this transition and how it could happen. Definitely the last year more actively. And I am so grateful and respectful that she's making sure that this transition will happen well. But of course, even more than that, I absolutely can't say enough about, again, the creativity, the dedication, the expertise. This is the kind of program that when she took the helm, there are so many challenges. People are saying, this is really hard to do. This is too much work. Are you sure you want to do this? In fact, when she came to me when I first became dean, proposing the TDRC, I probably said some of those things. Are you sure that you want to do this? Are you sure that all this extra responsibility and everything that you're taking on, can you reassure me that this is a good idea? And she said, as you can imagine, this is going to be great for the students. This is going to equip them for their careers. And it's really important that our community gets the advantage of their services. And lo and behold, all of that is true. And not only have you all got to experience the fruits of her labor, I got the experience of knowing that I could really trust everything that she was bringing together in a really high quality way, again, to serve the public and to serve the students, and therefore to serve our school. So as somebody who is not a risk taker myself, knowing that Judy, I think, isn't temperamentally a risk taker, and yet in running this program takes on the risk for the bigger cause, to be sure that she can again provide these experiences that make the world a better place. These are very, very lofty aims that Judy has that you all share. And I just can't say enough about thanking you for your leadership, Judy, through all the years. The tireless efforts, the hours upon hours upon hours, the persistence, and just the care for students and clients that is never ceasing is really powerful. If we were in person, we'd all get to toast with our beverage of choice. We're doing a program instead, so there's no toasting and beverage of choice. But at some point soon, I hope we will get to do that. And Judy, thank you so much for all you've done for the program. And know that we're glad that you're still going to be around to experience the fruits of your labor, maybe with a little less labor going into creating those fruits on your part. And yeah, I'm super grateful and super eager to hear the specifics about what you all have done. But I know Gwen has a couple of things first. We have an award presentation first.
Yes, so I'm up next, and as field placement director, we have an award to honor our partner organizations and supervisors, and it's a Excellence in Training Award, and it honors supervisors and training programs at field placement sites who have made outstanding contributions to the training of our graduate students. Training contributions can include breadth and/or depth of practice activities, innovations in how students are utilized in service delivery, contribution to diversity and or other materials contributions to training graduate students in training. This award started in 2016, and it's my honor to present the award to Dr. Tom Welsh, owner and director of behavioral services at HumanX Academy. HumanX is a private middle and high school which provides a structured and supportive environment for students with a wide variety of learning, behavioral, and emotional needs. HumanX works with students who have been diagnosed with or thought to have learning disabilities, ADHD, autism spectrum, twice exceptional learning, bipolar disorder, processing speed deficits, both auditory and visual, mood disorders, nonverbal learning, OCD, traumatic brain injury, anxiety disorders, and many other unique needs. HumanX has trained 9 students over the years with IDP, and here are what a few of the student graduates who have some nice things to say about him. I'm so excited that Tom is being recognized for his role in training the students of GSPP as it is much deserved. Tom embodies the characteristics that make a great supervisor: humor, empathy, intelligence, and a willingness to share knowledge. Tom created an environment for student therapists that allowed me the space to try new things and make mistakes, hopefully not too many. Tom demonstrated how to navigate stressful, emotionally laden situations with curiosity and warmth, and constantly challenged me to think critically. Tom supported me in pursuing my goals, and for that, I am eternally grateful. Another student said, Tom is an outstanding supervisor. He consistently demonstrates his appreciation towards his staff and interns. Tom is always willing to give career guidance, advice, and make space to share throughout, and connects about thoughts about clients. I very much appreciate his consistent efforts in checking in with me and his willingness to meet people where they're at. I have learned so much from him and will without a doubt take what I've learned and implement it within my own clinical approach and practice. So it is my honor today to be given this award to HumanX founder and director of behavioral services, Dr. Tom Welsh. And I'll hand it over. Yay, Tom.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's been my honor to work with students and a wonderful program. And I will say that I think I probably get more out of the interaction with students than they do. But it's wonderful to hear that it's been a great experience to them. It's a huge part of what I want to do as a professional, and look forward to continuing going forward. This is a wonderful program, and I have never been disappointed by a student that I've had work for me from your program. So thank you all.
Well, thank you, Tom, and congratulations. We really appreciate the collaboration with you and in the years that will follow. So
For sure.
Very cool. So I think I'm up just to say a few words, and just want to thank you, Shelley, for your comments. I really appreciate it. This is a program that originated 17 years ago, 16, 17 years ago, because Peter Bursky and Elaine Hansen had a great idea. And GSPP has always been a place where great ideas are encouraged. And I want to thank Shelley, and I also want to thank Peter for putting trust in me to guide this ship for the last many years, and for your wise mentorship and collaboration. I remember early on, Peter complimented me about getting our international internships rolling and said I was doing, quote, trapeze work without a safety net, end quote. To which I responded, I didn't know there wasn't a net. It speaks to the experience of support that has been there throughout these 16 years from both Peter and Shelley, and I just so appreciate it. It's really been an honor to be involved in this creative and innovative endeavor, and a real highlight of my professional career, which, as Shelley mentioned, I am not ending. It's a huge opportunity, and it will continue to be, to work with really fun students and see them launch their careers. We've had and continue to have a great cast of IDP team players who've contributed so much, particularly Gwen Mitchell, Rohini Gupta, Bree Court, Tom Barrett, Janet Schreiberg, and now Travis Heath. Alongside our GSPP staff, totally committed staff, instructors, alumni, students, and supervisors globally, whose relationships are just to be cherished. It really takes a village. And last but not least, I want to say that my children have, as a single parent, my children have been a big part of my life story throughout this time as director. It's been a very interesting ride for them as they've seen through my eyes and theirs a global picture of mental health and social justice concerns that we as a family would not have encountered so intimately. So really thank you all for this gift of experience for me and my family. And I'm looking forward to what will be involved next. And I thank you all. So I want to, speaking of next, I want to introduce Tiara, who will talk about the panels that are coming up and what our students are going to be presenting to you. Tiara?
Hello, my name is Tiara DeBose. I'm a student of the 2021 IDP cohort. We now want to orient people to the panel presentation part of this event. As many of you know, the original plan was for students to travel to various international internship placements such as Malawi, India, Nepal, and Guatemala last summer. However, with the evolving pandemic, it became clear it would not be safe for us to do this. So our internship period was adapted to include a variety of domestic, remote, and in-person sites, and some students were even able to do remote work with their original international sites. That work that the students engaged in at their internships included providing psychoeducation and psychosocial support, developing programs, working on research projects, and more. This included working with populations such as healthcare staff in hospitals, refugees and immigrants, and the LGBTQ+ community. To get more specific, there were some students who worked virtually with the Family Rehabilitation Center in Sri Lanka, working cross-culturally with Sri Lankan psychosocial health providers. At Julie Soko, a mental health provider in Malawi, where community discussions were held virtually with mental health workers and community members in Malawi, while others virtually worked with mental health workers and community members, while others collaborated with local community organizations working with Maria Drost in a school-based setting with elementary children, at Coalition for the Homeless, providing integrated healthcare in downtown Denver, and Judy's House, a nonprofit bereavement center for children and families, and more that you will hear about as our program continues. We developed a web page that includes short bios for each student, outlining where they interned and what activities they engaged in. We will put the link for this in the chat now if you would like to look through these. To give students a chance to talk about their experiences during these internships, we will now divide into 4 breakout rooms that will each have 1 faculty facilitator and a panel of 5 to 6 students. Questions will be posed by the facilitator to the students to open up a space for student reflections. If you are having any issues with the webpage link, Zoom, or getting into the correct breakout room, please chat Carol. Before shifting over to those breakout rooms, I did want to take the opportunity to thank the whole IDP faculty, as well as GSPP as a whole, for creating a different internship experience during COVID and for their executing online classes, workshops, etc., that facilitated students meeting all the requirements for us to obtain our master's degrees. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate you.
All right. What we're going to do first is have the panel introduce themselves and very briefly indicate where they did their internship. And then I'm going to be the person who asks them to respond to some questions. So panel, how about introducing yourselves?
I can go ahead and jump in there. My name is Brianna Garrett. I interned at Domestically Sandstone Care here in Denver, Colorado, which is a substance use facility, and I also did my international placement at the Methodist Church in Meru, Kenya.
Can hop in next. I'm Emily. I worked at the Shir Memorial Hospital located in Benepa, Nepal. I did that work remotely, of course. I also worked with the National Childhood Traumatic Stress Network with the Terrorism and Disaster Team. And then finally with the Fox Lab here at DU Psychology Department.
I can go next. Oh, sorry, Meriwether.
Go for it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heidi Maurer. I also interned with Emily at the Shir Memorial Hospital in Benepa, Nepal. And then I also interned at a local clinic here in Denver called the I Am Clinic. And that was kind of focused more around the LGBTQ community.
My name's Meriwether, and I was interning with Maria Drost Counseling Center, working both as a school counselor for elementary students and also in their community mental health clinic. But my international internship was remotely working with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network with the Terror and Disaster Team.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Elise Legge. I did a remote international internship with the Family Rehabilitation Center in Sri Lanka, doing trainings for their psychosocial support staff. And then I also did a domestic internship remotely with the National Network of Immigrant and Refugee Rights, which involved some staff trainings and doing some research on mental health needs of asylum seekers and migrants at the US-Mexico border.
Hello, Christopher, either one, and I worked or interned at internationally, it's called ODEAM, Organization for the Development of the Indigenous Maya, based in Guatemala. And I also interned at Judy's House, which is a grieving center for children and families.
Okay, I think we got everybody on our panel. So the first question the panel will respond to is this. COVID has created challenges that created the need to do internships without traveling internationally. What changes did you encounter, and how did you manage adapting your own expectations? And then also, what was a barrier or some barriers in providing services or support at your particular site, given the COVID challenges, and how did you adapt to that?
Thanks, Judy. I'm going to start us off here. So I think it's definitely very easy to say that we don't have enough time to adequately answer this question. I think as a group, we probably could write an entire book, probably an entire series of the challenges that we have encountered over this last year. But I think really in terms of my own international internship, I found that feelings of bitterness returned once we started the work remotely. And I think that it just really became apparent to me how amazing it really would have been to have gone to Nepal and do this work in the hospital with Pukhar. He really is a light, and once you meet him, even if it's through a computer, it was very intriguing, and you wanted to be there with him in person. But luckily for me, after the first week, these feelings really dissipated quickly because it became so apparent how much our knowledge and help was needed by the hospital staff. So I was really able to get into the work that way after I let the bitterness go and the anger go. But unfortunately, as the internship progressed, the COVID situation changed in Nepal, which Emily will touch on a little bit later. This again kind of affected how we were able to connect. And again, we were forced to kind of manage our expectations. But overall, I think that this year's been a super humbling experience of patience. And really the internship with Nepal was no different. And with that, I will pass it over to Bree, who has a little bit more specifics.
So some of the stays, speaking barrier-wise, of Zoom did stick with myself personally, as well as just with others, as there was a lot of difficulties among communication, both domestically and internationally speaking, with the remoteness at times. But really this allowed for a lot of flow of grace and flexibility to really come to the forefront in really a lot of the settings I was a part of personally. A lot of the adaptation occurred due to the simple fact that from the beginning, I don't much with all of us, a lot of us really had no choice due to the particular circumstances COVID-19 presented, but knowing really my peers and I were really both working to better ourselves and to help those around us made the adaptation so much easier, more manageable, and really allowed me to realize kind of a new world of aid and communication that can occur much more productively on a virtual format. This especially became apparent with navigating conversation with the site I work with internationally, Maru, to which I kind of will discuss a little bit more later. But I also know Elise is going to give a little bit more good continued information regarding this topic and just how this has continued to be.
Yeah, and thinking of major barriers that we faced, especially those of us who were working cross-culturally with foreign sites, one of the biggest barriers was having less one-on-one contact with the people we were working with, particularly because a lot of cross-cultural learning can come about in these spontaneous, unplanned interactions that are outside of your normal workday activities. And so not having that to facilitate that cross-cultural learning was a challenge and required us to be a little bit more intentional and conscious about planning a little bit more cross-cultural learning to better understand each other and how to learn and grow from each other. And then in addition, just thinking about sort of managing expectations, we've talked about some of the disappointment we felt. And it was an important process to kind of think about how we can reframe this situation where in a lot of crisis situations, you can also find new opportunities. And so many of us found, even though we were disappointed in having to stay home and work remotely, found new opportunities. For me, that was working with the National Network of Immigrant and Refugee Rights, which I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do had I been able to travel to Sri Lanka.
Great, thank you guys. Okay, the second question, what did you find out about the impact of COVID globally as you engaged with these agencies and their staff doing mental health work with communities and also with individuals?
So I'm going to take the lead on that one. So as I said earlier, I really had the privilege of getting to work and communicate with the Methodist Church site in Maru, Kenya. And for our time there, we'll say I was remote, but they primarily shared an interest in discussing and gaining further insight on the overall concept of relapse prevention and how this relates with COVID and how to address this realm of substance abuse for clients, as well as stress management within this, both for the counselors and for the clients themselves. So Chelsea and I, my country partner, compiled a document from a really culturally informed lens covering these concerns. But in an ultimate sense, which I think is different from maybe some of my peers' experience, the site really did not inquire nor want as much aid as it related to mental health concerns and COVID, and share that their cases have ultimately begun to decrease over time, which is really awesome, and that they have also gained their additional vaccinations. So that was a little bit of a different environment from some of my peers. But so though we were unable to meet as much as we had hoped, there was a total of 4 to 5 meetings where we were privileged enough to have an insightful conversation about this. And I really grew appreciation for their lens on life and just sobriety. One of the sayings they have is, I was reborn 3 weeks ago, and just the idea of being reborn and that being possible in this setting is just fascinating. I really enjoyed working with Dennis and Catherine and all those to kind of see the twist they put on life, to show the emphasis and the highlight they put on the hardships while also validating how people can grow within their own life and their own experience. And I really know that sooner rather than later, I will definitely find myself in Kenya.
Yeah, so I can jump in next with a similar but also different perspective from our international site. As Heidi mentioned earlier, we had to really think about the impact of COVID globally, working with the Shir Memorial Hospital staff in Nepal. We learned from our supervisor and then from following the news about the immense strains that have been put on their already fragile healthcare system as a result of a really devastating second wave of COVID infection that they've seen since mid-April. So it made me think more about how different countries are in really various stages of the pandemic and have different capacities to handle it than we do here in the United States. The strain on the hospital impacted our communication with our supervisor, and really our ability to meet with the hospital staff regularly was pretty disrupted and ended up just not being a feasible direction for us to continue with. So our supervisor helped us to understand that they had pretty high stressors related to significantly increased workload and hours. They had a lot of concerns about caring for their own family's health and safety. And we're really dealing with increased mortalities in the hospital. So it seemed clear that all of this was really very taxing on the staff's already strained mental health. So as an internship team, we had to learn to be flexible and adapt to the specific needs and availability of the staff and the capacity of our supervisor to work more directly with us. So we ended up kind of switching gears and from facilitating those regular discussion groups with staff to working more on our own to provide a document of practical resources that staff could use, similar to kind of what Bree was mentioning, talking about doing with her site. So a little bit more distance and a little bit more working on our own, but I think that's really the best way that we could have helped in that context with the COVID situation.
And to build off of what Emily was talking about with how different areas are kind of in different stages of response, when I began working with the FRC in Sri Lanka, I was a bit surprised that at the beginning, the COVID response was a lot less impactful on their day-to-day work than we had experienced here working at the clinics in our own internships domestically throughout the year. But as the quarter progressed, cases in Sri Lanka began to climb. And so as we were starting to open up here in the United States, I saw sort of the real-time process of their shutting down and locking down a lot more tightly. And needing to start working remotely that mirrored a lot of our own experiences earlier in the year. And so in that situation, there was a limited capacity for staff to help their clients in the ways that they were most used to in terms of interacting face-to-face. And it seemed to be as much of a strain on my colleagues in Sri Lanka as it was here among our cohort when we had to switch to providing our clinical services through telehealth. One thing that was a major worry among my Sri Lankan counterparts in terms of COVID was the increases in substance use and domestic violence that they were seeing in their communities and in their clients. And really the frustration was really palpable among the counselors who wanted to provide really thorough support, but were restrained by these COVID restrictions. And then in addition, just thinking to my other internship with the Immigrant and Refugee Rights Group, I gained some additional knowledge about the impact of COVID on programming with migrants at the border and asylum seekers, especially in terms of the detention situation. It's especially alarming that at detention centers across the US, COVID mitigation protocols really aren't being followed very thoroughly, and those who are detained who speak out about it are often punished. And so this is really exacerbating an already terrible humanitarian crisis and a violation of human rights.
So yeah, my internship with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network gave me an interesting perspective on the impact of COVID. We were working on a mass violence project, a research project. All of the data was collected before COVID, but as we were reading these transcripts of interviews and considering the reasons for mass violence, recommendations for recovery, there was a sharp rise in mass violence events in 2021. So it made it pretty difficult to engage with the material because we were reading about these events in the research and we were also reading about it in the daily news. So there was no research that we were reading about on causation, but we did discuss the relationship between how the combination of the pandemic, isolation, stress and economic distress, the current political climate, and the internet were really all kind of the perfect storm for this rise that we're seeing in a lot of mass violence events and a lot of murder suicides. So overall, this really made me understand the pandemic in a different way and kind of the fragility and the importance of human connection and how much mental health is intertwined with bigger systems.
Yeah, and from my kind of global perspective, in my meetings with my supervisor at ODIN in Guatemala, we were able to get a pretty detailed perspective of how COVID impacted them and their organization. We were told that the stigma regarding COVID in Guatemala is pretty serious, and many people limit any mention of it or just deny having symptoms of it in general. And And she also told us that there have been reports or stories of people being openly harassed in public if they're suspected of having it. So just the stigma is pretty harsh there. And similar to our own clinic here, around when the pandemic started, and closed their own clinics, and all the staff had to take a pay cut to prevent layoffs, which was good on them, but still obviously a sacrifice. And she also mentioned the vaccine is still in a stage that only the elderly are eligible to get it right now. And even most of the elderly that she's encountered are reluctant or distrustful of the vaccine or the systems providing the vaccine. And also interestingly, she pointed out that ODEAM is technically not recognized as a United States business, or it's a Guatemalan-based business, based off of funding and founding in some way. So whereas other healthcare workers were already offered vaccines for their primary workers, ODEAM has to go through an extra step and apply for these things. And they're still kind of in the waiting process of that. And also wondering if their employees would even be accepting of it. So despite all these, slowly but surely, they're reconnecting with their clients in distance services.
Okay. So our third question, was there a personal success you accomplished during your internship, or something you were initially nervous about but overcame in some way?
Yeah, I personally was very nervous about going into a group of professionals in the hospital in Nepal and teaching pretty basic psychoeducation and stress management techniques over Zoom. I didn't know if this was something they were interested in or if they would find it useful, particularly kind of talking about mental health can be pretty stigmatizing there. So though we were only able to meet as a group over Zoom a few times, it seemed like sharing this knowledge and having conversations about the impact of mental health was really useful and appreciated, specifically in that healthcare context with staff. Many of the staff expressed that they weren't familiar with these techniques and concepts such as self-care, but found the resources we provided to be really helpful. I also learned from them how healing they find the use of humor and movement, which kind of challenge us to find new creative ways to try and engage them over Zoom, whether it was different mindful movement activities or breathing activities that could get them moving a little bit. They really appreciated that. And it just made me really wish that we could have been working more closely with the staff in person, again, challenging us, but we were able to learn to adapt over Zoom.
Take over here. I think one of my largest successes and one that translated to multiple settings was really a built ability to engage successfully in my work life while really maintaining boundaries and flexibility during COVID. Like I said, this accumulated over time and through many difficult conversations where I really looked introspectively into what I was giving my energy to. And this enabled and continues to enable me to really engage with clients and in a clinical setting much more actively without the cost of my own mental well-being overall. This is definitely something I'm still navigating and exploring, such as maybe with my peers as well. But initially, I was also really nervous to begin setting boundaries and to be more assertive in the sense of advocating for my needs specifically within this. But as I've had more and more experience in doing so, both internationally and domestically speaking, I've learned that it's often met with kindness and consideration. And something specific I was also nervous to engage with was navigating those boundaries and communication as it related to the international site and the time gap that they had, where we were meeting at 7 a.m. Denver time and 4 p.m. Meru time on Mondays, as well as navigating that content in the time frame. Here we're used to being super punctual, and there it's much more relaxed, and I like that, but it's so hard to navigate over Zoom. But it can be nerve-wracking really voicing these concerns and setting those boundaries. But like through my experience in the past 2 years, especially with this international experience, like it just was a lot easier to navigate. And I'm definitely thankful to Dennis and the site as they were really eager on their end, which made it easier.
Yeah, so there is definitely one moment of success, if you want to call it that, that I will remember for probably the rest of my professional career. It's very similar to that of Emily's because we worked with the same people doing the same stuff. So mine was around the mindfulness techniques that we showed to the hospital staff. My nerves came from being given the opportunity to lead the very first one in the hospital. And that was really nerve-wracking for me, because I had done this before in different internships and led mindfulness elsewhere with people very similar to me, but I had never done that with people with a different cultural background and people who had a different primary language than mine. But when the night came, I shook my nerves off and I did it. I led the hospital staff through a body awareness activity and they all loved it. Kind of like Emily explained, for a lot of them, this was like the very first mindfulness activity that they had ever heard of, let alone done one. And they were all so grateful for us for showing them that, because they all seemed to really absorb it and want to use it again. And I remember one charge nurse in particular being just so vocally appreciative, because I think there was just such a desperation of wanting to decrease the anxiety and stress, but not knowing how and not having the tools necessary to do that. So being able to be the facilitator in that moment, and being able to give them something that they could actually use and be helpful, that was it. That was Gwen's term. That was the golden nugget of the internship. And after doing that in that setting, I felt very confident that I could do it anywhere else. And it was just really empowering to be a part of.
I think the thing that I'm proudest of in my internship work was conducting a comprehensive training on psychological first aid with my Sri Lankan counterparts at FRC. I was initially pretty nervous about this because we all know how difficult it can be to engage other people doing online training and education. And I was really just concerned that they might not find the information very engaging or helpful in an online format. My supervisors in Sri Lanka were really helpful around this and provided some great insight and guidance on how to structure our activities, bring in some role plays to help with engagement, and just really provided me with a lot of great information specific to Sri Lankan culture and experiences of disaster to ensure that the training really remained relevant and helpful. And so there was a lot that went into this training. We had to develop pre and post measures and administer them to people working at various branches of FRC. We created documents and tools to use in the field, had to get those translated into 2 different languages, had to secure interpretation. And so it was a lot of work, but it really paid off. We got a lot of positive feedback from everyone who attended on how it was helpful in conceptualizing psychosocial responses in a disaster setting. And so I'm just really proud that I overcame that hesitancy to provide that training, and really was able to collaborate and put the work in to make it be what sounded like a really helpful contribution to the organization.
Yeah, I guess for me, I would consider all of my experience working with ODEAM in the past 8 weeks has been a personal success. Like my colleagues here, I was very intimidated by the schedule that I set out with trainings and staff welfare groups, but I was left feeling pretty proud of the way that I used so much of the knowledge that we've gained from our classes and adapted it to something more culturally appropriate for the presentation. Of suicide and self-harm, and again, like facilitating a staff welfare group with the promoters who work directly with the indigenous population there, and they discuss their own challenges and successes in their work that they do. So yeah, like as others have mentioned, like the mental health topics in general, talking about these things can be pretty stigmatizing, and a lot of people have their own strong beliefs or may not feel comfortable sharing their own personal experiences. But my country partner, Ethan, and I found a way to provide practical information on all these topics and in a way that they found useful. And it made me happy to hear that the promoters and coordinators who attended the welfare groups and the trainings, they stated that we created like a comfortable space to talk about these difficult topics, and even seemed eager to want more information from us at some points, which was nice. But yeah, so overall, I consider how I engage with the staff there and the information we shared a success. I tried my best to smile and laugh off any grammatical mistakes when I was speaking Spanish, and just provided a humanistic approach that fit their culture and perspective best.
So yeah, for me, I think I was really nervous about the heaviness of the material we were going to be reading, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to be able to hold all that knowledge and those intimate details about mass violence while there's so much stress in the world already. So I was proud of the way that we were able to engage in supervision and have really meaningful discussions with our supervisor about how complicated these issues are, and how to take action rather than to just kind of feel hopeless about it. And I was also really excited about working with qualitative research. I'd never done that before. And be able to kind of team up and work on recommendations with our little team that we pulled out of the research. And I hope that some of our work can be incorporated into an eventual recommendation for the public on how to engage with media in a trauma-informed way when recovering from mass violence.
Okay, thank you guys. So the last question really is about what are your biggest takeaways from the internship period, and how has it informed what next professional steps you'll be taking once you graduate?
So one of the largest, and there's going to be some overlap with this answer and my last answer as well, but one of the largest takeaways I had was seeing just the connection and the impact of that said connection that can really be made on the virtual platform we're on, and how successful this can be both domestically and internationally speaking, despite its frustrations and even my inability to engage sometimes, and how much access this can really open for those needing a virtual support. In a more personal sense regarding takeaways, the supervision I received in the last month and a half at my domestic placement really helped me better pay attention to the way in which language can hold also significance, as well as how I can better set and communicate professional boundaries, as I mentioned earlier throughout my career. And this has also really helped me realize that there will always be challenges in most workplaces, and I may not always be able to maybe change the person, circumstance, or the time zone as mentioned, but I can always hold to really my values and be curious as to really keep myself healthy, both in and out of the workplace. And I will really know how to better engage in a professional setting as it relates to this. And this has ultimately aided in informing what I want to look for in future jobs, future places of work, and just further allowing me to get insight on what I want to compromise at times as well when it relates to boundaries. But yeah, thank you.
For me, reflecting on this question, I think my biggest takeaway came from some of the trainings I provided with the Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. We did some trainings on preventing burnout and vicarious trauma among the staff members of the organization providing services, and just seeing the need for that knowledge and the ways that they benefited from that just really emphasized to me the importance of organizations providing humanitarian work to take care of their own workers, and the need for mental health, not only for people using services, but for the people providing services as well. It was a really great opportunity to see how people benefited from knowing more about how to prevent burnout and vicarious trauma and replenish their energy. And it's something that I will be taking forward to whatever organization I work with next.
I think one of my biggest takeaways came from working with the National Childhood Traumatic Stress Network, really learning about the complexity of responding to mass violence events and how everyone's impacted differently and may benefit from a range of different resources and responses. So really learning the best thing we can do as mental health professionals is to educate and present different options to survivors and family members and community members. Also looking at data from qualitative interviews conducted after mass violence events, I came to really appreciate the rich information that qualitative research can provide and how it can more thoughtfully and inclusively inform best practices by really taking in a range of perspectives. So also in the Fox Lab for the Barriers to Crisis Services project that I was working on, we started collecting some really powerful data that I'm excited to kind of dive into and think will be really helpful in figuring out how to break down some of those barriers in the future for people to receive better care. So all of these experiences kind of helped me to solidify my interest in incorporating research, particularly qualitative research, into my work in the future. And then lastly, I also just really appreciate the move to check in on a personal level in supervision meetings, kind of hearing more about how things are going wherever people are located domestically or internationally, and taking time to just recognize both the common and unique experiences that we're all having and considering how that might impact our work. And that's definitely something that I'll look for in future supervision and will remember if I ever myself decide that I want to go into supervision.
Yeah, so tagging on to what Emily was mentioning, I think my biggest takeaway was also kind of how complex the response and recovery to mass violence is. Through the research and through interviews we were reading, it became really clear how important leadership is during these times, and also how people's responses and recoveries are so individualized. So this makes it really difficult to have clear guidelines on how to proceed, how to engage in recovery. And overall, I think I realized that the key is to empower survivors to have information, options, and choice in their responses. And that means a lot of the recovery process is up to the individual and the communities to kind of figure out what's best for them based on the recommendations, which leaves a lot of room for kind of murkiness and error. And this experience is kind of yet another thing that reinforces how complicated and gray mental health is, and kind of the importance for me to really kind of accept that more and more in my career and kind of work with that.
So for me, I really have been pretty accustomed to working clinically in person with people in the same room in previous internships. So having the focus really be on psychoeducation and clinical structure, I think was definitely the biggest adjustment for me, but I think also in the same sense, my biggest takeaway, because I really was able to understand how people in a different country and setting think about mental health and also how they treat it. And I think this kind of enlightenment, I guess, it really opened my eyes to how much work needs to be completed globally for the overall mental well-being of not only people who struggle with depression, anxiety, other mental disorders, but I think also those who attempt to help them, whether that be in a hospital or a clinical setting. So with that, I think as I continue to grow professionally, I believe that the work that I did with the Scheer Memorial Hospital really gave me a clear insight and perspective to consider how culture influences future clients of mine and how it really develops their lives and their understanding for their own mental health.
Yeah, really in line with what colleagues, classmates have said. One of my biggest takeaways has to be the value of sharing culturally appropriate mental health information, and how complicated are brushed aside or outcasted in communities around the world because of misconceptions of what's happening to the person or just fear. And which is why I thought our last training that we provided at my internship was so important and foundational. We talked about the impact of COVID on mental health, and we spoke about the reactions we have in dangerous situations or high stress situations, and what that does to our brain and what that does to our decision making. So most of the conflict we see from COVID or mental health issues in the community in general are fear-based reactions, and we don't take the time to notice that maybe we are misunderstanding or misinterpreting the situation because we're too focused on our own safety, which is a difficult thing to maneuver for all of us. But I imagine if everyone understood this, would they take an extra second to pause before harassing someone? You know, would they find ways to relax themselves instead of looking for someone to blame or to attack? You know, I could only hope. And the way this informs my next steps in instilling, or in next steps in my career, is it instilled the confidence in me to work with the Latinx or Hispanic community going forward. You know, I practiced my Spanish facilitating these groups, and I was really proud of how efficient I was in doing that. And so I want to continue to share practical and necessary mental health information to reach more communities, and maybe even improve systems of care for the Latinx or Hispanic community. So I really love clinical work, but I also will probably find myself in program evaluation or research to get that done. Yeah.
Wow, well, I'm just really impressed with all of you and all of the work that you did, and how flexibly you were working with these organizations to kind of see what was needed in our COVID environment, and dealing with that yourselves at the same time. And how engaged you were in the internship experiences, I think, is really a testament to your fortitude. And I notice, so most of you I worked with when you were first in the program, and usually I work with students midway through because they're doing their internship midway through. But now you're at the end of the program, and I've gotten to read and listen to all of the work that you've been doing, and have just been so impressed with the growth and the level of sophistication that you have described and engaged in as you've approached this work. So very impressive. And I wonder, you know, we have an audience here. I wonder if we do have time for questions to the panel too. And I wonder if anyone has some questions. We have faculty, friends, family, supervisors, some students in the program. Ask away. What would you like to know from these folks? My instructor sense will get me to call on you, so think fast.
Well, I thought of something, Judy.
Yeah.
Well, I would just like to know, like as second years, like graduating from this program, like what kind of advice do y'all have for us first years who may or may not go into these international internship next year? And if we do end up having to go through Zoom, then like, what should we prepare for? Thank you.
That's a great question. Yeah, what would you all say about Ashma's question?
Well, I think I'll jump in here first and say that feeling the disappointment and being angry is very normative and okay. I will say that because I know that we all felt that for a while, I think, and that was a very shared feeling. So in those moments, if that does be the case of doing it through Zoom, I think I would allow yourself the space to feel that, because it's a big deal. I think it's a big deal not to be able to do that. But yeah, I would say allow yourself to feel it for a little bit.
I think like the biggest like things for me were like, and this was for myself and for everybody, flexibility, patience, and 100% validation is like, Heidi pretty much said it better than I did. And I think another thing that helped me was like reflecting on how I wouldn't have really like there was no chance 2 years ago that I was going to independently contact this location in any way by myself. So having any sort of connection with them was amazing. Honestly, just getting a different lens, even if it was through a virtual format, was still such a privilege to have, and kind of focusing on that was my thing. And then I think one of the things to definitely be advice/flexible for is just being patient. If it is on Zoom, things will not start on time. People will maybe not show up. You could be sitting there for 30, 35 minutes before anybody actually shows up on the Zoom link. So time runs differently in different places. So that'd be one of my biggest things.
Speaking to the more practical side as well, advice I would give is to build your skills at setting your own internal deadlines, organizing yourself. Keeping a routine is really important, especially in doing remote work, because so much of it can feel really unstructured. And so just sort of developing those skills and learning to love setting up a structure for yourself, which for some of us doesn't come as naturally as others, but it's an important thing to learn, especially in remote work.
Yeah, I was just going to echo both what Elise and Bree were saying about creating boundaries, especially with those international internships where you might be working with someone in a completely different time zone, and really just clear communication is huge, and being a self-starter and trying to, just reach out as much as possible and create a solid plan ahead of time, I think was what I saw work really well. Or placements that didn't have as much of a solid plan didn't go as well. So just working to kind of lay that out for yourself and for your supervisor ahead of time was really helpful. And yeah, then if it doesn't work out, just, creating those boundaries for yourself, and also just learning to kind of not be afraid to reach out and have conversations that might feel a little bit uncomfortable in kind of a respectful way.
Yeah, who else might have a question? We'll go back to the larger room in about 5 minutes, but we certainly have time for another question.
Hey, I was one of the runner-up supervisors that Emily and Meriwether. I wasn't your first choice because I was with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, but I am thrilled I got the opportunity of working with both of you and Alex. But I know one of the conversations we got to have is seeing a different opportunities that there are in the field. So being administrators, we do work nationally, so we always work remotely. So I'm just wondering if some of you, because you've had this different opportunity, have you made different choices of your next steps, or wanting to integrate something new because you had an experience from a runner-up like myself?
I definitely kind of not direct contact, but kind of indirect from a peer with the domestic kind of secondary option, got some good access to kind of a path of just exploration. And I guess I don't know how to specifically answer the question in a general sense, just because I didn't get the opportunity to work with them at a field placement like way, but I definitely was impacted by that whole process. And I'm very grateful that even despite kind of mentioning what Elise said, the lack of opportunity from going some places created a lot of opportunity to really do things and have access to things we wouldn't have before. So I'm definitely appreciative.
Yeah, and I think just learning that there are really these opportunities to collaborate with people across the country, across the world, and really just thinking about how remote work can allow us to do that. And I definitely appreciated the internship with you guys to kind of help me that like this can be an option in the future, even if it's not like my full-time work. It could just be a collaboration type of project, which is really exciting to me because I always like to have my hands kind of dipped in different interests, different projects.
Yeah, to build off what Emily said, I think it just feels like there's a much wider array of possibilities available in our careers moving forward with the options of ways to collaborate remotely than I might have guessed when I had started this graduate school journey. So just seeing the wider range of options, while the way that we got there is frustrating, it's pretty exciting, and it's got me thinking about ways that I can incorporate both domestic and international work in my career moving forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm excited and wonder kind of, it seems that maybe the way people are going to work has slightly changed forevermore, which is interesting to see how that'll play out. But I think it also really reinforced how much I want to be doing some in-person work as well. So I'm definitely going to try to get that. But I like the idea of being able to have some more options. So.
Yeah, great question. I'll never think of you as a runner-up, Melissa.
But it's important to acknowledge that, you know, as Heidi had said, you have to, both as a supervisor and as a, you know, you both the parties have to acknowledge the hardship of the shift. So
makes total sense. Yeah. Any last Hale, go for it. We have a couple minutes.
Well, I would like to say that first off, that I never miss these annual meetings because I'm just in awe of what you guys do. And, you know, I so appreciate the disappointment this year of not being, you know, Heidi, I think you captured it very well. There's the disappointment of not being where you thought you would be and having that experience. But, you know, I'm also really impressed with your resilience and your resourcefulness and actually your experience. It sounds like that you got a breadth of experience that you might not have otherwise had, and it's really heartening to hear you talk about. I didn't speak fast enough.
No, but would you like to continue? That's a wonderful way to wrap it up, Hale.
Well, just the dedication and the resilience that you demonstrate to continue on with the important work that you know you can have in front of you. I'm just very touched by that. So anyway, congratulations on managing it so well.
Yeah.
To connect in one of the most universal ways in grief.
I think like Chelsea, Melissa, and Emma were saying, COVID has been an experience of grieving people and experiences lost, and some days and aspects are better than others. I was supposed to go to Uganda last summer. Like many of the rest of my cohort, I was not able to transition that work virtually, so not only did I not go internationally, but I also did not engage in any international work. As part of an international program, that was difficult to come to terms with. Depending on the day or moment, it still is. Luckily, I was able to be placed at internship sites that taught me valuable skills and taught me about a wider variety of job opportunities that aren't peer research or peer counseling. I was still able to engage in activities that allowed me to grow and hone my skills and knowledge, even if it wasn't as hands-on as I might have been otherwise. Being a virtual intern also came with a lot of pros and cons in and of itself. I really missed getting to chat with supervisors and other team members when I had a question or during a coffee break. But working on my own schedule at home had its advantages too, particularly since I'm in the middle of moving. I'm not at home right now and have needed to schedule appointments for house things and during the day some days. So in all, it's been a very mixed emotional experience.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there were many different changes that I found myself going through. There were changes to many aspects of my everyday life, such as no longer having control of where I was able to go, who I was able to see, Upon finding out that I was not able to go to India as planned, I was of course deeply disappointed. However, for me, it highlighted the seriousness of COVID-19 and its reach on individuals worldwide. That summer, I adjusted to things as well as I could and found solace being at home with family, as many of my peers did as well. Initially, and often throughout the early stages of the pandemic, I found myself struggling between being lost in a fog and feeling intense feelings of anger. I found it surreal how quickly in-person classes were switched over to Zoom and how I had found myself enrolled in my master's degree online with all courses, class interaction, and social engagement in regard to my degree being through this format. In many ways, I felt robbed of the education that I felt I had worked so hard for. As summer approached, I was offered an opportunity to work at Denver Health, providing PFA and peer support for the staff. I found joy in the ability to be able to see people in person and felt extremely grateful that there was some sense of normalcy that I was able to have despite COVID-19. Despite this level of normalcy, there were still changes that I had to adjust to at Denver Health, one being wearing a mask for 8 to 10 hours a day, while others were navigating new ways to socialize and support staff during COVID-19. Instead of handshakes, we would bump elbows. Hugs were special because if you gave one, it was a chance to be close to someone in a way that during this time was often seen as not allowed. And we would say we would smile at each other with our eyes since we were unable to see each other's smiles. There were also changes in our political and social climate, as social media highlighted the continued racially charged attacks on Black and brown bodies. This initially left me feeling angry, scared, and alone. As time progressed, I realized that this was often a reality for many at Denver Health, as well as our community as a whole. And I found ways to support individuals who were also struggling during that time helpful while I worked to also process all of this. Through this internship, I learned what it means to make myself a moving therapeutic space for others. And I appreciate the many ways I learned that this work can be adapted and changed in order to aid the needs of individuals in this community.
Great. I will move to question number 2 and know that I've got 4 structured ones, but then we'll open it up and we'll have 10 minutes. So if things are resonating or deepening your curiosity about the student experience, feel free to kind of pin it and we'll circle back to that opportunity for interaction after these next couple questions. So number 2, how did COVID and other important global events impact you, the people you were working with, and the agencies you were working with?
So as mental health clinicians, it's our job to sit with people in some of their hardest times. We see on a daily basis how individuals are affected by experiences and stressors in their lives, and we try to do our best to help them wade through trauma to healing. It often feels like we need to be unwavering pillars of reason and strength for others, forgetting that we ourselves experience stressors that can break us down as well. This past year was one full of loss, full of sadness, anger, turmoil, and conflict, among other things. It felt at times that there was very little time for us as students to just sit and process our own loss, our own grief, or our own anger. This year highlighted, for many who had the privilege of turning a blind eye to it before, the macro level changes needed within our society. It highlighted how every system within this country has a foundation in systemic racism and oppression, upheld covertly and often not so covertly by white supremacy. As a student, it was difficult to feel as if discussing chapter 5 of a family therapy textbook in a breakout room on a Thursday morning held any sort of legitimate importance when there were people protesting their right to live on the street a block away.
Counseling in a world that is full of loss and uncertainty is taxing. As a graduate student during a pandemic, I found myself overwhelmed quite a lot. It was hard to concentrate when the world was rapidly changing. This pandemic highlighted a larger issue that we are experiencing in our country. It showcased how everything is intersectional. More specifically, how disproportionate the deaths were. Every system we are involved in is full of systemic racism. Underlying health conditions increase the likelihood to die from COVID. Some of the highest levels of undiagnosed chronic illness are in our inmate populations and in ICE facilities. These facilities have disproportionate percentages of Black and brown people, the people who are not only being impacted by COVID, but by generations of oppression and racism. This was going on at the same time as increased xenophobia for the Asian community and ongoing police brutality. I cannot imagine the trauma that has been experienced this year and for generations. In our global public health class, we had learned how misinformation and uncertainty during a health crisis can perpetuate the health crisis. We were learning about this through the example of the Ebola crisis at the same time that our lives became a simulation of what we were studying. Our country became intensely divided, and misinformation created even more burnout. I found myself mad at others in my community who would not wear masks because I was seeing the other repercussions. I was counseling the frontline workers and the grieving families who should not have had to lose their special person. I watched as burnout hit my internship site, and many interns dropped out of the program, as well as clinicians. It is hard to go to work and talk about death and loss only to come home to hear about it. COVID will continue to impact all of our lives. Again, I haven't understood much of the process of my own personal impact within COVID because I've had 2 internships and I'm in graduate school. I'm expecting that to hit me like a ton of bricks a little later down the road.
Obviously, COVID turned the world on its head, with me right along with it. I was incredibly lucky to not have lost anyone close to me, but I know many who are not as fortunate. Agencies I worked with lost staff. Everyone around the world is collectively grieving lost lives, lost plans, lost feelings of security. Even while discussing that, though, it is privileged to have feelings of security. We live in a world where Black and brown bodies are not treated the same as white bodies, leading to too many unnecessary, unwarranted, horrific deaths. Our country is falling apart. Our world is falling apart. Corruption, systemic racism, systemic classism, systemic sexism are only serving to worsen the effects of the pandemic. My mental and physical health have significantly declined over the past year, and I know I am far from alone. The media likes to talk about the impacts of isolation and uncertainty on our mental and physical health, but it is far more than that. We can't leave our homes without wondering whether we will be in the next mass shooting. People are dying by the thousands in India, and the US has too many vaccines that they literally cannot give away to its own citizens. Genocides are still actively happening in the Gaza Strip, Myanmar, and other places you haven't even heard about. At least 2 are happening within our borders. Climate change is at a critical level, and world leaders are dragging their feet. Despite the global outcry, police accountability remains at ridiculously low levels. There are so many other things I could talk about too. All that to say, COVID is not the only problem impacting people, impacting me. It is hard to be present and stay productive, especially as I come to better understand how work I am doing is perpetuating violent, corrupt, horrific systems. That is not to say the organizations I worked for this past quarter or this past year are perpetuating those systems, but the mental health profession on a whole is, and I'm a part of that. It has been difficult to come to terms with the fact that what I saw as part of the solution really isn't, and I've really struggled as a result. I've struggled when trying to advocate for change throughout this past quarter and the past 2 years, only to be met with resistance, pushback, or people just plain ignoring the fact that I said anything. I've struggled to stay hopeful in the face of so much horror and resistance to change, and it's not just me. I see it in the faces of the people I work with, my fellow cohort members, my family, my friends, my supervisors. That has been a huge contributing factor to me leaning away from counseling. Because how can I help someone when I'm struggling so much myself? How can I instill hope when everything is literally and figuratively burning to the ground? I have a cousin who had to leave her country as a child due to violence there, only to have to explain to her 2-year-old son now that he or someone he loves may be the victim of state-sanctioned violence in this supposedly safe country. It breaks my heart and fills me with rage. I have another close family member who was almost killed by cops who were joking about causing his death while the event was happening because he has a mental health disorder and was experiencing abuse at the hands of a female partner, going against society's gender norms. This is the truth many people live on a day-to-day basis, our friends, our colleagues, our clients. I'm largely protected from many of these issues due to the inherent privilege I have as a white person who can pass as neurotypical. I cannot work for and within systems that allow for discrimination and violence, that turn it on people like it's their fault for having reactions to people discriminating against them and killing them for not being a cisgender, white, heterosexual, physically able man with no other mental illness or financial problems. So the events of the past few months and the past year have solidified my ideas and crystallized in my brain just exactly what needs to change. Unfortunately, it's everything. Everything needs to change. And I'm not okay. Neither is anyone else.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there were many different changes I found myself going through. On a global scale, the impact of COVID-19 did not fully set in for me for many months. Although I was aware that the pandemic was impacting individuals worldwide, I was struggling to accept its presence in my own life. With my internship being in person, I felt safety in being able to disconnect from the outside world. One, because at times it was all extremely overwhelming. And two, also through focusing on ways to address COVID-19 at Denver Health with the staff. As time progressed and the spread of COVID-19 increased, I was struck by the stories from the staff members in which they were affected by changes such as feeling disconnected from family members abroad or sharing intense feelings of fear for their family members they could not see. As my internship quarter this spring began, the global impacts began to really hit home for me despite it being over a year into the pandemic. I found myself in a position where the organization I was interning with in India, SCARF, the Schizophrenia Research Foundation, had staff directly affected by COVID-19. This impact by the pandemic in India left many individuals in many different situations, such as struggling to find a hospital to help aid their family members, struggling with COVID-19, shortages of supplies, and a lack of availability of resources. During this time, it was hard for me to process the privilege I held during this pandemic, and I was able to see how an aspect such as location can have an impact on access to necessary resources or even availability of the COVID-19 vaccine. Turning inwardly, I feel the pandemic impacted what I felt was important in my life and often gave me space to pursue hobbies that I had never attempted before. I was able to be creative and expressive in ways that I had not since the pandemic started, while also at times leaving me struggling with feelings of isolation and loneliness. I found ways to energize myself, find peace, safety, and joy. The pandemic showed me how to be adaptive and less reactive.
All right. The many events that took place in the year of 2020 and 2021 thus far, I am still processing. From the multiple cases of police brutality to the Black Lives Matter movement to what happened at the Capitol, this all made me uncomfortable in my own skin as a therapist of color. These all put me in many tokenizing positions and uncomfortable positions within my personal and professional settings. I was told by a few people who were not Black or brown how they too are afraid of the cops and how it's not fair for only my people to have that fear. I was told by another professional that I was the go-to person if anyone wanted to chat about the Black Lives Matter movement. I was told to give my perspective in front of a group of non-Black and non-brown bodies without warning about how I felt about the many police brutality caused deaths without my consent. I was told that maybe we will all achieve world peace when we are all the same skin color. In these moments, I wasn't given a choice to react non-compliantly, or else that would be a bad look on me. With these comments and questions thrown my way, it was expected of me to act professionally and accept what was said to me without protest. Unfortunately, I did do this in fear of how others would view my displeased reaction, which was actually quite valid for me to have. So with this said, I can say that I was impacted heavily and I'm constantly thinking about how others are perceiving me because of the color of my skin. I'm constantly thinking about if I'm coming off as too aggressive or if my appearance is making someone else in the room uncomfortable. I'm constantly thinking about if my appearance will make a client discontinue or become uninterested in my therapeutic services. In essence, I am constantly thinking, and it's exhausting.
Thank you. All right, question 3. What did you notice about ways to maximize professional relationships and ways to engage in them in person and virtually and with your work throughout your internship?
This year, it was difficult to make relationships with anyone. It was hard to keep relationships. uncertainty can make even the simplest tasks feel so difficult. I did try to create new professional ties at my domestic internship. I was given my own office, plenty of hand sanitizer, and many masks. All of the people I met this year, I've only seen half of their face. Sadly, when everyone is in their own office and doing Zoom therapy, socializing does not happen very easily. I need to have relationships with the people I work with, so I found myself inviting everyone on socially distanced walks to City Park to see the elephants at the zoo for free. This was a great way to build my relationships and get away seeing my favorite animal weekly. When it came to international internships, I found myself heavily relying on WhatsApp. Even when jumping through these COVID hoops, none of these situations were normal. I wanted to picture myself writing reports with other interns, feeling stressed and making jokes. I wanted to experience the difference in professional culture in Malawi, showing up to meetings early for them only to happen later in the day. Was I professional in my internships? Yes. Did I get to know others as well as I had wanted? No.
Like I mentioned before, I was completely virtual this past quarter. I've been virtual in everything I've been doing since April 2020. Being virtual is nice, but is also terrible when it comes to relationships. In one of my internships, I never met the whole team because everyone's schedules were just so different. In my other internship, the 3 interns only met once outside of supervision. They were all other members of my cohort, so I knew them, but it was still a vastly different experience than being in person. Supervision is always important, but the importance of supervision was even more pronounced during remote work. Many weeks, supervision time was the only time I talked with my supervisors. Like I said before, that's not really how I like interacting with supervisors and coworkers. I've been doing this for over a year now, though, and I still haven't come up with a great solution, so suggestions would always be welcome. Clearly, I need to do a better job reaching out to schedule meetings just to chat, but the unnaturalness of scheduling a meeting to talk about nothing in particular is something I'm hesitant to do, for better or worse. Mostly worse right now in this new virtual space. Not being afraid to send a text or an email or ask for a meeting is something I had to keep reminding myself of also. Engaging in other opportunities to connect was important in learning more about the organizations I was working for and my supervisors.
As I shared previously, at my internship at Denver Health, it was interesting to see how normal things remained as far as being able to interact and have in-person processing. I often was able to easily have access to my peer responders as well as my supervisor whenever necessary. There were aspects of the internship which were kept on a digital format, such as supervision or our weekly debrief meetings. To show some perspective, despite being able to see many people on the daily, I did not actually meet some of our expanded team in person until I saw them in the space or the hospital coincidentally. As far as my professional relationships at my internship, it was interesting to me as we oftentimes worked as a team to see how much of my personal self was asked to come into the space. My team often valued learning more about the person I was and even my struggles from day to day. I think having a space and time together to get to know each other was extremely valuable and only strengthened our professional interactions. I was able to identify instances where a fellow peer responder may need me to intervene or assist them if they were having an off day, or maybe the topic they were discussing with a staff member was hitting home for them in many ways. Despite this, I also at times felt that I had to be extremely professional in certain settings and often had to put my authentic self and my experiences as a helper, helping the helpers during a pandemic on the back burner and present in a way that I was not also struggling at times with the intense reality that we were all facing. I was not allowed to be me, Tiara, a daughter, granddaughter, Black woman, scared and alone. I was a support system. In those times, I often sought out the support of my fellow peer responders or family members. I am grateful for the fact that my internship was in person during this time, as it allowed for me to still have the day-to-day routine I was used to, while at the same time it was interesting to see the closeness I was able to have with people, while also having a closeness to COVID-19. Many of the staff members I would see on the daily worked on floors that directly were in contact with COVID patients, and after seeing those patients, they would come in and see us. I am thankful for the opportunity to give back to so many people working to aid others in their struggles during COVID-19.
Okay. So globally speaking, I had built my relationships with my Kenyan supervisors throughout my internship by constantly and openly communicating through email, meeting times that would work for us, communicating what would work for us in terms of realistic workload and deadlines, and clearly communicating boundaries and expectations. Additionally, I built these relationships by consistently asking questions like, what are your expectations of us as interns? Was there anything unclear within the work we sent you? And do you feel as if the information we sent you is applicable to your community? Lastly, I built these relationships by making sure we had discussions during our Zoom meetings with our supervisors about what to expect for the next meeting. All of these things served me well and helped me to become more confident in my abilities to do a global internship virtually. However, all of this does not take away the grief and loss I feel of not getting an in-person experience with my supervisors in Kenya.
So to give some context, Stout Street Health Center is a multi-level, multidisciplinary health center with services ranging from behavioral health, case management, and multiple different types of medical services. This meant that there were a lot of staff members that I wouldn't interact with on a regular basis. So one thing that I tried to do every morning was to walk to the clinic to see if anyone needed me and let the medical providers know I was there if they needed any sort of mental health consultations. I would also use this time to check in with other behavioral health providers and get consultation on my own cases. This really allowed me to build connections with other mental health professionals in the clinic that I wouldn't normally work with. And then it also allowed me to connect with other non-mental health staff members. On Wednesdays before the clinic would open, we would also take a short walk to the coffee shop down the block. And we would use this time to just talk about our week and plans for the weekend, which worked as a reminder for all of us to focus on self-care, as this can often quickly go to the wayside in the workspace. Striking a balance between work discussions and more personal ones really allowed us to open a space where work wasn't the center for just a short time. And this was very helpful with decompressing during an often chaotic week in the clinic.
Great. Final question. Although it is early to reflect on this time period of your training, how do you think you grew throughout your training and internship? How has this informed what next professional steps you will be taking once you graduate?
These internships really helped me grow my qualitative research skills. I had read about what qualitative research is and how it's conducted, and I felt like it was something I'd be interested in. And no surprise, it is. I love getting to hear people's stories and turning that into something that can help others. On a related note, both internships showed me other career options where I could do those research type things without doing pure research that ends up in an academic journal somewhere, behind a paywall that doesn't really make a difference for years. While that research is definitely needed, I'm not that patient and I want to make a difference now, not in 10 years. I'm still not entirely sure of what I want to do with my life and my career, but I have a better general sense of what's out there for people who like the things I like. I know generally the type of work I want to do, and I know I want to work towards systemic change to make society a kinder, more equitable place. For now, I'm going to focus on moving and taking a bit of a breath before sorting out what I want to do with my professional life.
Through this time period of training, I felt like my skills grew in many ways. I learned how to be extremely adaptive and flexible in my response to individuals. Working at the hospital, oftentimes staff members had limited time to talk and process their situations, so developing quick and effective responses was something I learned early on. Through this process, I found how much I actually do enjoy working on a team. The collaborative aspects of our daily work at my internship allowed for us to find ways to provide staff with a variety of options in hopes to both promote autonomy as well as having backups just in case. I also feel like I was able to learn how to be more responsive to the individual needs that the staff came to us with, because I feel that oftentimes in our field, we are taught to put our perspectives on a situation instead of allowing a person to share what they believe the issue is in ways that they might have attempted to address their struggle in the past. As for informing what professional steps I want to take next, this internship showed me that I still want to work with and help individuals in our community. I want my work to be adaptive, creative, and fueled by advocacy and equity. I enjoy working with everyday people who are out here in our communities doing the best that they can with what they have. With that in mind, I will continue my journey working for a nonprofit starting this summer in hopes to help provide psychoed, psychotherapy, and if anything else in my wheelhouse that may be valuable for the community I will serve.
I feel I have grown in many ways thanks to my rich clinical training and internships. Because of these placements, I have become clinically sharpened in remaining curious about another's lived experience and remaining unassuming about another person's carried experience. I have grown to realize that although I may be the therapist or mental health professional in the room, I am not the expert on my client's personal narrative. They are. Additionally, thanks to my training and internship, I have firsthand learned how to meet clients where they're at, and was honored to recognize that that is enough. Thanks to my training and internship, I have also become stronger in advocating for myself and others, and have become stronger in voicing boundaries for myself, as I have learned that I am in fact a human therapist who has to learn to rest too. I have also become sharpened in my clinical ability of asking relevant and appropriate questions to clients. Before, I used to think too much about what I should ask next, but really I have learned through experience that it's not about that. It's about remaining present with my client and remaining curious as their story slowly unfolds each time we meet. I've also become stronger when it comes to assessing for suicidality within adolescents, and I've become better in my skill of safety planning with those adolescents. With that said, because I've had the pleasure to clinically work with adolescents for almost a year now, my next professional step is to become a trauma therapist for children who have endured severe abuse, trauma, and neglect. Oftentimes, and especially during this hard time, children's voices get silenced, and I want to be a person who helps make them heard.
When I first came into the program, I definitely felt very out of place, not because anyone made me feel that way, but because I had an immense lack of confidence in my skills as a mental health clinician. My first year in the program, I decided to take the program evaluation seminar instead of the clinical one, which meant that coming into this internship experience, I felt a little more behind on my clinical skills than I would have liked. Thankfully, through my time at the coalition, I was able to get a lot of hands-on patient-facing experience with excellent supervision that helped me gain confidence and showed me that I really knew more than I thought I had. Working with actively suicidal patients was something that I had previously been very nervous about, but through my experience at the coalition, I became much more confident and comfortable in this area. Post-graduation, I will continue to work at the Coalition for the Homeless, working with a population that I've developed an immense amount of empathy and respect for. In terms of professional development, I've always enjoyed working in a hospital or clinic setting where things can be a little bit more fast-paced than individual therapy often is. So I've decided to take a little bit of a left turn and go back to school to get a master's in nursing in hopes of becoming a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner.
Coming into this program, I was amazed that I had been accepted. I didn't have much confidence in myself. For the first year, I found myself throwing around the term imposter syndrome quite frequently, which started making me wonder, am I an imposter or is this language just not serving me? I was waiting for someone to find me out and drop me. I am not that person anymore. After working virtually with my first client, I knew that I could do this work, and I knew how important it was for me to find my own voice in the mental health field. This has put me into positions where I have been taking action, speaking up when I see injustice, and highlighting where things need to change. This is a lot to learn for a small town girl who did not want to rock the boat she already thought she was not deserving to be in. One thing that has become clear to me is without systems changing, including counseling, which is steeped in colonialism, nothing will change. I have found myself questioning if I should become a counselor while knowing that change needs to happen higher up. I'm leaving this program wanting to immerse myself in mental health policy changes. Honestly, right now, I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something much bigger. This year of COVID, Black Lives Matter, xenophobia, and Asian hate, the systems need to change. I find that working within the system isn't cutting it, so I'm trying to find ways to break it. Obviously, I'm one person, but I know I find others who are also experiencing these feelings. All I know is that graduate school has been difficult. I have changed and I will continue to change and grow.
Thank you all. I want to center Alex, as one comment said, I love hearing other people's stories and turning that into something that can help others. Someone really appreciated that. And on that note, I want to open it up. We will go, they've added a few moments just because we got started late, but I really want to allow people to either do that, comment, follow up on a question, kind of any search for if you have deeper questions or thoughts about the panel and what's been shared today.
I just want to say thank you all so much for sharing. It's been, or it was really interesting to hear each of your stories and how different they were. And it was also really great to hear how difficult it's been for you guys. I think coming in as a first year, it was really hard with COVID, and I wasn't sure like if it was supposed to feel like this, or if that was just the state of the world. So thank you guys again for sharing.
Yeah, agreed. Just to second what Rosie said, I'm also a first year, and I think it's just been great. It brings hope to the slight chance that we also won't get this opportunity. And yeah, I think just the world like deserves more people like y'all. And thanks.
My internship over the past 2 months was split between 2 places. One was with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and with them, I helped to work with the Colorado Spirit Crisis Counseling Program. I updated a guidance document to support individuals in quarantine and isolation, and I helped to get a healthcare worker resiliency and retention project off the ground. My other half was an international placement with the Organization for the Development of the Indigenous Maya, and that's in Guatemala. And with them, I provided staff support groups, psychoeducational trainings, and continued on a program evaluation project I've been working on for a while to address perinatal mental distress. So that's what I've been up to, and yeah.
All right, thanks, Ethan. And our last panelist is Emily. I'll send it your way now.
Hi, everyone. Well, first of all, can everyone hear me? I am hotspotting off my phone. I thought I'd have Wi-Fi, but can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. I was a little worried about that. Anyways, so my field placement, I spent for spring, I continued on for my second year placement at Community Reach Center in Thornton, Colorado, providing outpatient therapy for adults, children, also utilizing EMDR therapy with a bunch of my caseload as well. And then I added on some tasks with the quality assurance, compliance, and training team. And I helped kind of on the back end of the clinical work, helping with trainings for new clinicians and helping with insurance audits and things like that, kind of learning the back end of it, the behind the scenes things, and learning what it takes to kind of keep a clinical practice like a community mental health organization running and flowing through just different compliance practices and getting everyone trained in order to do that. Yeah, so that's kind of what my last quarter looked like for internships.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear all the different things you know, that our students have been up to in, you know, pretty unprecedented times. I'm kind of tired of hearing that word unprecedented. I'm eager to get back to more precedented times, but this is the hand that you know, our program and our students were dealt. And you know, I think it's rather remarkable just seeing all that you've navigated to get here. And you know, what I hope to be able to do now is just ask some questions that we've prepared ahead of time. I'll ask the question, and then you know, whoever on our panel wants to take the question is just fine, and we'll kind of see where the conversation takes us. All right, so let me pull up my question sheet here. And first, a lot of these kind of deal with some of the unprecedented nature of the time that we've lived through and learning to be clinicians, doing international internships without actually being on the ground, internationally. In some ways, it's a blessing that such technology exists, right? I mean, I know that maybe we get tired of staring at one another on screens all the time, but if we didn't have these options, it's scary to think what would have happened to the program, during that time. So, students have really made the most of all of this. Now, the first question, COVID has created challenges, some of which we've already referenced, and this, really forced us to do internships without traveling internationally. What changes did you encounter, and how did you manage adapting your expectations?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start off. One of the big impacts for COVID for me was in terms of my mental health. It really impacted that in a really negative manner. And I had a lot of, personal things going on as well that, being in a pandemic and quarantine really did exacerbate. And so one of the expectations I most had to change was my expectation of myself. I realized that I really needed to do something that I enjoyed and that could actually, also be really beneficial to my mental health as well as my future. And I also came to the realization that for me, I really needed to focus only on one placement, without having to split my energies through multiple different placements. And while taking that into consideration, I also had to take into account the fact that if I was going to be working at an international place virtually, that there would be time differences and a struggle with that as well. And so I had to make the choice for myself to choose to do a domestic placement in terms of, keeping my mental health intact as well. And I ended up at Queer Ashes, which was a placement that I found was really beneficial, and I really enjoyed my work there as well. And so while my expectations had to change and I had to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to be doing an international placement, I definitely gained so much from the placement that I did do.
Yeah, thanks for that, Z. And I think it's a really nice reminder of, the humanity involved in this for us as well, right? And thinking about our own mental health. And I appreciate you taking the time to speak about that.
I can follow Z with some of my reflections on this question. I encountered some pretty significant changes as well in terms of my expectations and hopes of working abroad, and kind of felt like I had no choice but to find ways to adjust my expectations to what became local domestic work. So like I said, when I kind of introduced myself, I continued working at my field placement that I'd been at all year at Maria Drost, which ended up being a really great option for me because I got to continue working with clients that I'd been working with all year already. And so got to kind of continue building clinical skill and my own personal competence as a therapist. And then additionally, like I had stated before, I began working at the Jefferson Center for Mental Health's crisis counseling program. And working for the Colorado Spirit team ended up being a really insightful experience. I got kind of this true experience of working with a crisis response team to an international disaster. So, which is not only the title of the degree we are all getting, but it's something we've learned about in many different contexts throughout our courses these last 2 years. So it definitely was difficult to come to terms with the reality that working in another country was not going to be plausible, while also trying to recognize the benefits that I received by continuing my clinical work at Maria Drost and joining a COVID-specific crisis counseling response team in Colorado. So a big part of my adjustment process to all the things that had changed was mourning the loss of this experience that I was really excited for and really hopeful for. I remember when I first began applying to graduate schools years ago, I was really intrigued by the International Disaster Psychology Program for its focus on using a cultural lens to understand trauma, and then being able to take that lens and put it into action during an 8-week internship in another country. So knowing that this was, such a huge draw for me and coming to this program and then watching COVID hit and kind of watching that experience be taken out of my hands in a sense without being able to do much about it, it was really altering for me. So I went through a process of mourning the, what could have and what should have been. And I went through a lot of moments of denying and resisting like the reality we were all living in, as I'm sure a lot of us can relate. And then at some point I kind of sat with all of that and started to realize how much of a privilege it is to be offered an opportunity as unique and powerful as living in another country for 2 months and immersing into an entirely different culture and part of this world, and to really get a glimpse into a uniquely different approach to mental health than what I know or what I've been used to in this country. And I started to become more grounded in the reality of what my privileges are, what my identity in my life has kind of held for me for the last 27, almost 28 years. I've been receiving higher education at a private school in a very popular and sought after city. I have a home that's kept me warm and sheltered. I have a fridge full of food that's, kept my body healthy and fueled. And I have a lot of warm and loving people around me who support me in my life. And I think through my work in these internships, I've come to realize how much this pandemic has impacted those things for a lot of people. So, in saying all this, I'm not trying to diminish my own anguish or distress around this past year and with this spring internship experience, because that anger and sadness was very real for me in missing this opportunity. But I think this process of stepping back and taking a different perspective has been really important and really valuable for me and for my way of adjusting to this experience and to this past year.
Yeah, thanks for that, Katie. I really appreciate the discussion of grief and mourning. It's something I feel like, nationally and in our larger systems, we still have a lot of work to do around that. I also really appreciated the balance of acknowledging the grief and how it was painful to have things taken away, and then also acknowledging what you still got out of it, and what you still have, right? Kind of walking that balance, which can be really tricky. So thank you for taking the time to share that. I'm going to move on to our second question here. What did you find out about the impact of COVID globally as you engaged with agencies and staff doing mental health and or psychosocial work with communities and individuals?
Yeah, I can lead off on this one. So I felt fortunate with my experience over the past 2 months because I was able to compare real-time reactions and real-time responses to the pandemic in the United States and Guatemala. I think these two places have a lot in common, and they have a lot that's different about the two of them. They speak different languages, and there's just different cultural expectations in both places. But really, in terms of COVID, I still just remember talking to my supervisor in Guatemala about how disrupted all their services were there. She said everything was changed so drastically, and that a lot of their employees at this healthcare organization in rural Guatemala, a lot of their healthcare workers were starting to call into the organization about their own mental health concerns. Meanwhile, in the United States, I saw a lot of the similar issues coming to light. Working with that healthcare worker resiliency and retention program, I saw the impact of COVID on healthcare workers in our own country. And that was all interesting and difficult and meaningful to work with. But then in terms of differences, I saw it's amazing, and I'm not trying to take a stance on any sort of vaccination stuff, but it's amazing to see the differences between a well-resourced country like the United States and a less resourced country like Guatemala. You know, we have all these vaccinations, all these types and shapes and sizes here, and we're in phase, like 4 or 5 or maybe 10 at this point in the United States. And that's great. And we're also letting some of the vaccines like expire on shelves, which is interesting. And talking to people in Guatemala, they said that they're not sure anybody under the age of 50 is going to be able to be vaccinated. We talked with my supervisor, and she was asking for like our opinion on, if you get one shot of one vaccine, can you get another shot of a different vaccine? Because they're not sure they have the resources to provide all of it. So you could see really clear resource discrepancies and the inequities that have come with this COVID response globally, and just how fascinating it was to see it all in real time. One thing that I just think is very comparable between the United States and Guatemala, and probably countries all around the world, is just how distressing this pandemic's been to all of us. I think the World Health Organization said that like 97% of countries have seen their healthcare systems disrupted by the pandemic. I don't know what the other 3% of countries are. Maybe they just don't have healthcare systems. I don't know. But my point here is that it just normalized the whole experience for me. And I got to see how disrupting an international disaster could be, as Katie mentioned, during an international, during an international disaster psychology program. So I feel fortunate for the opportunity, and it's just so interesting to be able to compare and contrast two similar countries in some ways and two different countries in a lot of ways.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. And, you know, like the spirit of IDP is still here, even if it's happening digitally, right? I can still hear it in your story. I can't help but reflect on, you know, like what a sort of typical, if I could use that phrase, a typical counseling program might be like versus what the IDP program might be like. And, you know, there's definitely still some of that IDP influence in listening to your story. Thanks for taking the time to share it.
Yeah, and I wanted to share a little experience of mine too that's really related to Ethan's experience, kind of describing the inequity of resources globally. So some of us still had the chance to work with our international internship partners. For example, I was supposed to go to India, but even though we weren't able to go abroad, we were still able to work with them. So like I mentioned in my introduction, I worked with them on reviewing existing literature for the effects of the pandemic or disaster on patients, as well as their caregivers. So our hope was really to find different interventions to help these effects, specifically after COVID happening. We felt like that there was a really big need for this. And then, however, during this time, India's COVID-19 cases were rising at extraordinary amounts. I think they were saying a life was lost due to COVID every minute. And so we started worrying about our supervisor and the state of the country. And later that week, we had found out that our supervisor contracted COVID, and thankfully he recovered. Though this definitely threw a wrench in our project. And during this time, I really wish, you know, we could help them in some way, but it's just really hard to think about working on these kinds of projects when, you know, I knew people in India were fearing for their safety. And so this was just like an experience I wanted to share to describe the impact of COVID in other countries who don't have access to the vaccine, which can be hard to remember. Like Ethan said, our world here in the US is like slowly going back to normal. So it's just, yeah, crazy. in the other parts of the world.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. India was the last country I was in, other than the United States, obviously, coming back in late February of 2020. And so to hear those stories are striking for me personally. Obviously I'm aware of what's been going on in India, but the way in which you were kind of closer to it just by virtue of the experience you were having, and also the theme of grief there again. And I think, Evelyn, what you're raising continues to challenge us of like, how do we go on and do the work that we're doing in the world while also taking time to grieve and to try to take in and process everything that's happening, right? I just so much has been asked of us and of people throughout the world, and your story was just really making me reflect on that in a way that maybe I hadn't quite yet. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Let me pull up my other question here. So question 3, we've got 20 minutes or so left, just so we till we're supposed to be back in the main room, so we can kind of gauge our time here. All right, so the third question: what did you notice about ways to maximize professional relationships and ways to engage in them in person and virtually, and with your work throughout your internship?
I can start talking about this one. So I was fortunate enough for this spring quarter to be mainly in person, working here in Colorado, and I was able to see clients both in person and via telehealth, via Zoom, clinically, which was good. And I think they both showed some benefits to each side, but also being able to connect. All of my team meetings were mainly on Zoom, but we were all in offices in the same building. So I was still able to have that connection of being able to go and knock on a door if I had a question, or being able to pop in an office just to kind of chat and form that community and that make those connections with different people. And in the second part of my internship that wasn't clinical, that was in like the quality assurance part, it was in an office building that just mainly, that only had staff. We didn't see any clients there. And so towards the end of the internship, the vast majority of people were vaccinated, and things, regulations and things like that were becoming more lax. And so we were able to start doing in-person meetings, which like, it was so strange to start to like see my coworkers in person and things like that. It was such a weird experience to start like, oh, like, okay, you're this tall. Okay, got it. Like, it was such a different experience. And I think it was really nice to be able to start forming those connections in person too, because as much as Zoom has given us the opportunity to connect from afar, I think having that in-person connection is so much more valuable, at least to myself personally. I find that when I'm on a Zoom meeting, I am just so eager to hit like the leave meeting button and just be done with it for the day. But if I'm in person, I feel like, okay, I want to stay a little bit longer, chat, socialize, get to know people, hang out, and like grow that professional connection as well, and those resources. And being in person was really able to help me facilitate that just with my connection style. It felt more natural and more readily available in that. So I'm very thankful that we were able to be in person. I know that that wasn't everyone's experience, so I'm definitely empathetic and towards that experience as well. But I felt very grateful to be able to, for that to be my experience and be able to socialize again, and actually be able to talk to people in person and figure out how to talk to people in person again. So yeah, that's kind of my experience there, at least.
Yeah, you're the second person in the last couple of days, Emily, that I've heard reference the height thing. Like Tiamo said that the other day, like seeing people in person, and she was like, "Oh, I didn't realize you were so tall." Or, and there is this process of kind of stepping back out into the world and all of that. I feel like we're in this in-betweener space, and your internships were popping up right, at least in the United States, where we were kind of in that in-betweener space, which perhaps we're still in to one degree or another. Yeah, thanks for that, Emily.
Yeah, I kind of want to also speak because my internship was completely virtual. And so like we had to do a lot of like maneuvering in order to like really like allow for connections to be made over a virtual space. I think that I really was able to maximize this because like I mentioned in my intro, like I co-led groups, and I also ended up having kind of like a team leader as well as a supervisor. And so I had multiple people that like if I was having an issue, I could go to this person or I could go to this person. And in doing so, like was able to kind of like create connections with them that, and like we would have kind of like team meetings, and we were really mindful to kind of like start off the meetings with like a fun question or activity in order to kind of like foster a sense of community that, you know, is very difficult to create in virtual spaces. And like there are also kind of like self-care groups for us counselors, as well as like having documentation, kind of like Zoom rooms of like everybody who needed to do their paperwork could get together in that Zoom room and all work on it kind of like together to kind of like create that sense of like shared office space, which was really nice. And like we also had like an online kind of like messaging kind of like platform that made it really easy to just like shoot somebody a quick message if you had a question, like you're calling across an office space. And like there are also like different kind of like channels in this in that media platform kind of thing. And some of those channels were, you know, dedicated to different teams who are like working to kind of collaborate with each other. But also some of the channels were meant as kind of like a safe space for clinicians and faculty or employees to really, you know, get together and, you know, build that sense of community. And so through all of those avenues, I really felt like I was able to kind of like create those professional connections and like contribute and take away a lot from like a sense of community as well, even though we were completely virtual.
Yeah, that's wild, Z. Just thinking, like listening to Emily and then listening to you and thinking about the ways that, like, it seems we all need community. It's just a matter of how do we form it in these particular moments in history. And it's like both of you were able to do that in your own ways through your experiences. The adaptability is pretty remarkable. Yeah, thank you for that.
And I can speak to this one a little bit too. So similar to Z, I've been completely virtual since March of 2020. So we're hitting maybe like 14 or what is it, 15, 16 months, you know, you lose track of time. But a lot of months, over a year easily, just here. And it's been difficult. So it's been difficult to maximize professional relationships because it's all been remote. With the Colorado State, I've been able to go in person maybe a couple times to help work on a document where I sat on a computer in a room by myself, much like I am doing now. And so it's been different. In terms of maximizing things, I've been fortunate with the organization in Guatemala. I was able to hear people speak Sutuhil, which is like one of the indigenous Mayan languages. So I like heard that being spoken. That was wild. And someone showed us around a countryside like on their phone, and I got to see it on a screen, and that was also interesting. It wasn't the same as being there in person, but it was close. And with the CDPHE, as someone who's from Colorado, it was just so meaningful to be able to give back to my home state and to people that I grew up with in terms of responding to the pandemic. And I've also made a lot of professional connections that I have a good feeling will continue going for a bit longer. So I've definitely tried to make the most of this international opportunity and put a lot of intention into that. I read. And I think one thing that I can't ignore though is the fact that I literally have like butt marks in my chair at this point. Like I've been in this chair for so many hours over so many months that it'll be nice to get in person for some things in the future.
I appreciate that, Ethan. I suspect you're not alone. I have similar marks in my chair. I think I'm going to need a new chair, in fact, at the end of all of this. So, yeah, thank you for that. Okay, we've got one final question. We've got about 10 minutes or so. I'd like to have all of our panelists have a chance to respond to this. Here's the question. Although it is early to reflect on this time period of your training, how do you think you grew throughout your training and internship? How has this informed what next professional steps you will be taking once you graduate? Would it be, okay, good. Yeah, I'll just let y'all go.
Are you gonna call on us? Sorry. Anyways, yeah, so I guess just reflecting on everything, like I felt very grateful to be able to continue with my second year internship and keep up with my clients through that last spring quarter. And I think I was really able to solidify my training in EMDR and really understanding like that is something that I could see myself doing long term in the future. And I got to have some really cool breakthroughs and really cool moments with some EMDR clients that felt really cool to be able to witness and be there for. So I was really grateful for that time with them. And then with my quality assurance side of it, I would love to eventually be able to do some sort of private practice. And I think understanding that like how to work with insurances and how to be compliant and how to run things on the back end of it felt really helpful for my own personal knowledge and professional growth as I look into what just in my future career goals might want to be. And yeah, I think as I move on and think about graduation, I've been applying to a bunch of jobs and things like that, trying to work towards my LPC. That's the next goal here. And I'm planning to accept a job. I have an offer in my inbox that I need to look into for Stacy Roos Counseling Group. They specialize in trauma and EMDR work, so I'll be doing that in the Denver area. I think I'm going to start in September, so I'm going to take a little bit of a summer break and relax for a minute or two, take a breather, and then jump into the work and start into licensure. And I'm really grateful for my time with that internship to really solidify that I really would love to be able to do EMDR with people and just work through those traumatic experiences one step at a time with everybody in their own pace and in their own way. And then eventually maybe turn that into a private practice and know how to do that as far as like quality assurance goes and all that background stuff. So that's kind of what's going on with me for next steps, I suppose.
I can kind of go ahead and go next. I think that like the experience that I gained as, being my authentic self and being able to bring my queerness and transness into a therapeutic space and really help like contribute to like adding a queerness to the therapeutic lens was really a valuable experience for me to see how it really impacted positively my queer clients, to see me being authentic in a room and how that was really inspiring for some of my clients as well. And it really has made me realize that I want to work with queer populations and not in a, like I'm quietly queer, but being noticeably queer in that space as well. And, working with some of the stabilization and higher needs clients also made me realize I really enjoyed working with that and, helping some of that healing process as well. And, kind of like what my values in terms of therapy really were and really are, and how I can continue to do that and work in like individual and group therapeutic spaces to help kind of like decolonize some of the systems that we interact with on a daily basis. And so while I'm continuing to volunteer with Queer Ashes Transmasculine group, I also plan to like really be getting my LPC and looking for places that will help me to work and grow in with the populations that I'm looking to work with, as well as in the way I want to be in the therapeutic spaces as well.
I can go ahead and go next. So like I said in the intro, I was working with the Rocky Mountain Welcome Center. So while working with them on their Girls Rule the World program, which was working with immigrants and refugee youth girls, I was able to interact and support girls. And one of the main focus of the program was to empower them in navigating their multicultural identities. And this is something that I personally feel really deeply connected to. And really, this is just the population I really hope to work with in the future. And so this experience really solidified my passion for this population and work. And it made me realize how empowering and needed bilingual, or more importantly, bicultural service providers are, and inspired me to apply to jobs doing this work. And so I'm excited to share that I will be working as a bilingual mental health counselor in San Francisco with the Asian community.
I can jump in after Evelyn. Yeah, so I guess in terms of my growth, yeah, I think there's been a lot of professional and personal growing, and will continue to be a lot of that throughout these years. And so in terms of professionally, I think having this adjusted internship experience that we all had held a lot of value for me. I do think it broadened my understanding of the many different roles that mental health workers can hold in this field. I think throughout the previous 2 years, I've been very clinically focused, wanting to work in kind of a direct clinical manner as an individual therapist. And that's what I plan to do in my next steps after graduating. I'll be continuing with Maria Drost Counseling Center as a full-time therapist for both adults and school-aged clients, and I'm really excited about that. Yeah, but I do think it's going to be important for me to keep options open in terms of the types of work I do and I engage in, and the different roles I step into. Having the experience of working in a community mental health space like at Jefferson Center has been really beneficial, and I think will guide me through my career path if I decide to switch gears from being solely clinical to choosing maybe a different direction one day. Additionally, in terms of some personal growth, I think because of the changes that happened this past year, I learned to find ways to adjust my own expectations, to be flexible in new ways that I hadn't been before, and to really learn how to address my own needs and my own emotional experiences that came about. Finding ways to really take care of myself throughout this process became a much bigger feat than I ever expected. But I'm really thankful and proud of that. And I know that that's going to be a huge piece of doing clinical work in the future, in order to understand like what my own needs, my own limitations and boundaries are, and really how to meet them and fulfill them myself will be, I know, a key ongoing part of being a therapist and being a working professional in the field of mental health.
I think I'm the last one of us to jump on in, so here I go. Yeah, so I think for graduation, I guess in contrast to a lot of my counterparts, I don't know what I'm going to be doing after graduating. Yeah, it's as simple as that. I don't know. Which I think is this nice tension between it's a little stressful, sure, but it's also really freeing. I've been interested in program evaluation and research and clinical work and teaching, and I'm also interested in music and like outdoor activities and a lot of other wacky things. So who knows what's going to happen, which is kind of a cool feeling. I think to kind of center this back though to like what the program and what this internship has meant to me, professionally, I struggled a lot with the scheduling aspect of this, balancing 2 internships and other obligations and just personal relationships. It was really stressful for me to balance a schedule. figuring out how to make my own schedule, create boundaries and hold those boundaries was hard. But I grew a lot through that difficulty. And I think that going forward, maybe one day I'd like to do a PhD at one point, maybe do research and clinical work and teaching. And this was a good practice in holding your own schedule and figuring out how to juggle a lot of really interesting opportunities. And then personally, I delivered some psychoeducation trainings in Spanish to people in Guatemala, which is wild. And I also was able to help make a difference in state responses within Colorado, state responses to the pandemic. So that's all to say that personally, I think I got over the hump of a lot of that imposter syndrome and feeling like I didn't know what I knew, or if I knew something, it wasn't good enough, or it wasn't enough. But I feel more comfortable with the knowledge that I have, and I feel like a more competent professional now. So I'm just so excited to see where everybody goes with our cohort, with people in this panel, because I think we've learned so much and we have the ability to do a lot and make a difference in a lot of different ways. So I'm excited to hear all the stories.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I think we're going to get called back to the main room here soon. So I don't think there's any time for questions, unfortunately, but I want to thank all of the panelists for sharing your experiences with all of us, and just for all you've contributed to the program, you know, through some really difficult circumstances. And I know I've only had 1 year with all of you, but it'll certainly be a year I won't soon forget. And then thanks everyone for attending. You know, I know it means a lot to all of us, you know, and especially when people have worked hard on something, and, you know, to be able to share that and have people witness that is a really awesome experience. So thanks for taking time out of your days, you know, to join us. All right, now, I'm not exactly sure how we get back into the main room. I haven't got the little note yet, but I think, oh, hold on. Let's see. Yeah, I'm just looking at the other rooms here. Room 3, well, it looks like they're all still in there.
I believe I saw a message that said we were going till 4:10 up on
Oh,
top at some point.
Emily, awesome.
To open up the space virtually for everyone who would want to join us to join. And one cool thing that my supervisor, Julie in Malawi, noted was that Zoom was actually a great way for participants to join with anonymity if they chose to, by turning off their video or changing their name, which actually helped because mental health still can be stigmatized there. And as we were having these conversations, it allowed people to choose how interactive they wanted to be, which was really great. So I think overall we were able to adapt, and thankfully my national network domestic placement allowed us to also utilize Zoom, and we were working with a lot of interns from across the US, and kind of be all of us in it together, being able to adapt to those challenges, and it ended up being a great experience.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Caitlin, why didn't you tell us about some of the adaptations you had to make and how you handled the change in expectations?
Yeah, so COVID obviously changed pretty much everything about our grad school experience. Personally, I came to the program more for the trauma and cross-cultural focus rather than the international internship in particular. So I think I had like a little bit easier of a time kind of adjusting to that. But I also spent a lot of time thinking about the potential impacts on the countries had we taken risks that we, thank God, we did not. And the way that it would have been an ethical issue to harm those who might not have the same resources that we do in terms of fighting the pandemic. So I did actually end up feeling, in a way, good about us not going. I also ended up staying at my internship at Denver Health, and because that was working with staff, healthcare staff in the hospital, I definitely found I had a very fulfilling place within the pandemic already in my domestic internship. And then it ended up being that our B'nai B'nai Sheer Hospital placement changed from a suicide prevention program into a staff welfare program as their spike has been increasing their COVID cases. So in the end, we created a resource guide that contained psychoeducation, stress self-assessment, some small interventions, and local resources. I also was really thankful to have the chance to participate in the workshops that we had some professors and visiting instructors put on, including an LGBTQ considerations workshop, alongside an immigration evaluation workshop and a narrative therapy workshop. So I was really blessed to be able to take part in those and expand my knowledge without the normal pressures of graduate school homework and, class schedules.
That's awesome, Caitlin. Thank you so much for letting us know some of the things we have to consider working in an international program, about our impacts when we have to travel somewhere. There's really a lot to think about. So I appreciate that perspective. I want to acknowledge Madison, who's been able to join us. Maddie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then as well, just tell us a little bit about how you've managed your expectations in light of COVID with your internship.
Yeah. Excuse me. Thank you. I just wanted to take a second to say I'm so sorry for being late. I had some trouble with my internet and my router froze. And of course, it always happens at the best time. But better late than never. So my name is Madison, and I've been working at Devereaux Advanced Behavioral Health Cleo Wallace in the Rapid Stabilization Unit. And so prior to the onset of the pandemic, I was originally set to travel to India, to Chennai, to work with the Schizophrenic Research Foundation. And instead, I chose to continue on at my domestic field placement that I've had since September with Devereaux. And so this has been a really significant change in my plans. And so since I decided to stay working domestically rather than internationally, it was really difficult and, to be honest, disheartening to no longer be traveling. But I am extremely thankful for the experience that I gained at Devereaux. Continuing with the domestic placement and becoming a long-term senior intern really allowed me to dive deeper into developing my clinical skills and begin networking with some of the most inspiring clinicians I've met this far. As disappointed as I am in the change of plans we faced this quarter, I really wouldn't change the experience that I've gained during my time at Devereaux.
Thank you, Madison. It's really, challenging to think about all of the ways we've adjusted our experiences, but I love being able to hear you say that there's not much you've changed. So that's really, really cool to hear. Andrea, let's hear a little bit more about your experience this year.
Sure. So similar to Madison, I also shifted away from doing any international work the past 8 weeks, as my original placement in Uganda didn't really have the capacity to do things virtually. And so in the beginning, adjusting was definitely difficult because I felt like I kind of hit this point where I thought, I just wish I was in Uganda. I don't care about this stuff anymore. I just want to graduate and be done. And I kind of quickly realized that mindset was only going to be problematic. And I kind of was able to shift it into, but look at these other incredible opportunities that I get to engage in. So at the Jefferson Center, I had the opportunity to work on a COVID-19 behavioral health crisis response team. So I really got to dive in head first with everything that's been going on and help with something that was and still is so immediate and so ongoing. And so that felt really good to be doing something, so necessary for our community right now. Also at the Disaster Preparedness Institution that I was at, I was working on a child-specific mental health response plan for after a disaster. And so that was also something that felt pretty necessary and needed, and just thinking about the younger generation and the impacts that COVID will undoubtedly have on them. So, ultimately, this was not the experience that any of us had ever imagined. However, it definitely helped to put into perspective, what's really important in life, and that not traveling internationally for 2 months, it's not really the end of the world in the grand scheme of things.
That's awesome, Andrea. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really love how you made a decision to be present at your current internship. That's really inspiring. And I think one of the things we hope is that even though you all didn't travel now, we hope that we've equipped you to travel in future in your work or otherwise. And so we look forward to hopefully seeing you be able to do that. Hiba, let's hear a little bit about what you experienced and some of the ways you adjusted your internship.
Yeah, thank you. So like Andrea, I was also set to go to Uganda and I have the Wanderlust, so like that was exciting in itself. However, when I first came to this program, like Caitlin, I was just really here for that trauma and the cross-cultural work and the trainings that we got. And so leading up before the pandemic was a thing, I was really struggling with my feelings around, the possible neo-colonial implications of the work I might do over there, just going in for 8 weeks and then leaving. And also my own personal values around that type of work. And so for me, this transition was actually okay. I was like, okay, I can work with this, I can roll with it. And so I saw the silver lining in getting to continue my domestic placements and working in Canada. So with my domestic placements, I think I've become just a better clinician in general. And I've learned I've been able to hone a lot of great skills. And then I do have some ties in Canada. And so I was really interested in learning about the mental health field that's over there. What does the industry look like over there, and just understanding, what are my opportunities for networking and expanding that. Personally, I definitely have become way more adaptive and flexible because of COVID, because everything changed almost overnight. I also learned to vocalize more and ask for more support and more questions to make sure that I was completing my work in a way that was acceptable and appropriate, especially here in the US, where a lot of policy changes happened that really had a ripple effect in the mental health field. And so I think being able to say that I did that has been a great experience, and being able to express that too, knowing that I was able to navigate a system that wasn't ready for this.
Thank you, Hiba. I think to continue on with you, what were some of the things that you found about the impact of COVID? We can say nationally or slightly internationally with Canada involved. What did you see the agencies and staff doing in a mental health and psychosocial capacity within the community and with individuals?
Yeah, so obviously I don't have a lot of experience or exposure to the impact of COVID globally through these internships, because I would say Canada and the US are not that much of a culture shock in terms of a lot of these systems and communication and things like that. However, I think that, during this time, I really got to see the impact at my domestic field placements of how underserved populations, and even more specifically, low income, substance use, people with psychosis, were heavily impacted by the pandemic, and how the systems were reacting to them because funding was getting cut left and right. Teams were being condensed so that there were less people to save on money. They changed laws around, things like Medicaid and who can and can't, and how do you prove that you deserve Medicaid? And so just these little things that I saw where people were coming in at their lowest and were just overwhelmed with how do I get help? And at the end of the day, I think it was upsetting, but it was also, I think I was humbled by how much perseverance a lot of the clients that came in had to get help, because I couldn't imagine a pandemic, losing your job, dealing with psychosis or something like that on top of everything. I think a lot of people in my life, I know, would have just dropped to the ground and given up. But seeing a lot of these people come in and make choices for their mental health, I think was really inspiring.
Thank you, Hiba. Andrea, tell us a little bit about the impacts you saw in the settings where you were.
Yeah, so since both of my placements were domestic here to the US, I can only really speak to the impact that I saw right here in our own country. So since I was working on the COVID response team, I learned just how deep-rooted the COVID impact is for every single person. At this internship, I specifically started working with a population that was new to me, actually, and I started running psychoeducation wellness groups in a senior living community. And so that was really eye-opening to get a new perspective and just kind of realize that the isolation and the loneliness felt in that community was and still is so rampant and so deep. And then also with my work at the National Center for Disaster Preparedness, with researching the impacts on children, I learned a lot about how children have been dealing with the pandemic, and I've really started to understand that children are really the markers of how well a community is doing during and after any disaster. So, it's definitely no secret that some communities were absolutely hit harder than others, both physically and mentally from COVID. And I think that there's not one person collectively in our world who hasn't been affected by the last year and a half. So just overall, it's been a really humbling and eye-opening experience over these past 2 months.
Oh, that's powerful. I think there are definitely some communities that experience this just in a very different way. And so I'm glad you were able to support those spaces. Caitlin, tell us a little bit more about what was happening in your setting.
Sure. So for me, the biggest thing that I noticed was because I was working directly with healthcare workers here in Denver and also in Nepal. So it was a pretty direct comparison. And we definitely noticed that as the last few months have progressed here, a lot of us are vaccinated. We've got these mask mandates being lifted. There's a lot of relief, I think, that people are feeling. And I definitely noticed that within the hospital also. And comparing that directly to the way things have been getting throughout the quarter progressively worse in Nepal, I just directly saw their distress increasing. We were no longer able to have like Zoom meetings. They were working pretty much 24-hour shifts. And we just couldn't do the things that we had planned to do. And it really showed us how flexibility is so important, and how we needed to step back and realize we weren't the most important people in this situation. And I also saw, like, just anecdotally here, definitely a higher rate of in the people I talked to, vaccine hesitation or confusion with people in Nepal versus here. And I kind of attribute that to the lack of access and lack of like public health interventions by us in distributing vaccines to other countries. But that's just anecdotally what I noticed. And I definitely noticed the same sort of symptoms in the people at the Shear Memorial Hospital and here at Denver Health with, sleep issues and lots of things that we see during burnout and trauma that were very similar.
I think it's really powerful to have two experiences to compare side by side and being able to really appreciate some of those differences. So I'm glad you saw that, Caitlin. Madison, tell us a little bit about what you saw at Devereaux as you were continuing throughout the year with the impacts of COVID there.
Yeah, so similar to the experiences of some of my fellow panelists, I remained in Colorado, so I didn't really get to experience the impact of COVID globally. However, I really was able to gain a deeper understanding of how COVID was changing the need for mental health services. And like Andrea had mentioned about how certain populations and communities were impacted differently, working in the realm of residential youth services, the need during the pandemic has grown immensely. Working with our case coordinators, I've learned that the amount of referrals we were receiving was increasing, and as well, the acuity of the clients in need was increasing as well. So it was really clear that the stressors initiated by the pandemic were exacerbating the pre-existing conditions and experiences of these kids, as well as creating new issues that the clients weren't previously experiencing. So in the face of all this increased need and increased acuity, there was also a noticeable shift in staff burnout. And so self-care and interdepartmental support really became a priority and really noticeable about where we were lacking in the structures that had already existed. So our organization really had to make some adjustments in the overall structure to adapt to both the increased need and create more opportunities for collaborative support.
Oh, that's really powerful. And I think it's great to have that perspective of time to be able to see how things really progress, especially with the multiple waves that we've seen. Thank you so much. Morgan, tell us a little bit about the impacts that you saw, both nationally and globally with how COVID affected the orgs you worked with.
Sure. So I definitely noticed that there were some overlaps between domestic placement as well as my international placement as far as the impacts of COVID-19. However, there were, as Maddie noted, many issues that were pre-existing that were exacerbated by COVID-19. So for example, something that we discussed within one of our community discussions in Malawi was the increase in suicide rates within the country. Since the spike of COVID-19, the rates have increased immensely, and a lot of that, as was discussed, was due to the increase of financial insecurities and poverty, losing jobs and not having those connections with others, and just the difficulties of that, as well as something that we have seen common here are the rates of gender-based violence, of domestic violence. In Malawi, as well as domestically, those rates have increased and a lot due from the isolation and being in the household with a abuser or perpetrator of domestic violence. That was something that we also discussed in some of our conversations, and the difficulties that COVID has made for being able to get the supports needed. Just some of those pieces were really impactful to discuss and talk about. With the National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, we saw also exacerbation of pre-existing human rights violations that were happening at the border through things such as improper or lack of COVID precautions in detention centers, increased wait times, just things that have really impacted their rights and in general the lives of the individuals who are living and or detained at the border. And then additionally, we also were working with staff at the National Network who are constantly doing really great but difficult work and doing these vicarious trauma trainings, and this burnout that's also increased by the stress of COVID and all of these things that have happened alongside of it as a result of what has been going on in the world over the past year and a half. We really worked with the staff to focus on their well-being and how to sustain themselves during this time and moving forward with the work that they're doing. And I think as difficult as this time has been, COVID has opened up doors for conversation and focus on mental health and how important it is for everyone to be having these conversations.
Thanks, Morgan. And I could talk about this with you all day, but we find ourselves with almost just 10 minutes left if we're going to have time for questions. So I'll stick with you on this one, Morgan. What have you found have been the ways that you've been able to maximize your professional relationships and engage in those both nationally and domestically throughout the internship year?
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it brief. I know we're running up on time. I will say that a big piece of it was really not being afraid to step out of my comfort zone as far as asking for help and trying my best to communicate as much as possible despite not being able to interact in person, really leaning in and utilizing the technology. I interacted differently with both my sites. One utilized email more, and then we used WhatsApp within Malawi. So it felt a little bit different way of communicating, but we were able to build relationships and utilize just even common simple things such as icebreakers to get to know each other better. And really being able to just make time for that communication and building up what we could in the virtual setting was really important. And just trying our best to make the most of this alternative way of working together.
That's awesome. How did it go for you, Madison?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate that in the face of the pandemic, I was still able to work full time in person at Devereaux. And so it was absolutely wonderful. And especially after doing all of our classes online, it was really nice to get some in-person experience. And so because of the position I was in, I was a member of a treatment team. And so I was able to learn not only the importance of working on a team, but also how much I just enjoyed it, and how nice it was to be in a shared setting, especially when it came to particularly acute clients or complex cases. It was, I was really thankful for the constant availability of consultation, and even just being able to provide general support to each other whenever we got a particularly hard case. So we still had some challenges because of the pandemic. So we had to use Zoom to do our family sessions that would typically occur in person. And so that was a little difficult, training families that may never have used Zoom before, in order to facilitate the family sessions, which is a really important part of our program. So we faced a little bit of a challenge, but not as much as I would have working internationally.
Thank you. Caitlin, how did it go for you building professional relationships?
Well, internationally, because everything was virtual, it was much more difficult, I would say. It showed me how important communication really is in all professional relationships. Once we stopped being able to meet via Zoom, I really noticed how much time can take between emails when there's a time difference, and like how much can get lost in emailing, or just the tone of emails in general. And in terms of my in-person internship, I was also really lucky to be able to be in person since last summer. And our supervisor was actually not on Denver Health campus with us. So those lines of communication were still virtual. And I found that throughout all of these experiences, engaging both with humor and with humility, with humanness and vulnerability is very helpful and rewarding. Our team often started the day with little check-ins just to see who might be a little lower energy today, who needs this, who might need a break earlier. And that really allowed us to work really well as a team and look out for each other. And we were all lucky enough to be vaccinated pretty early on. And so we got to spend a little bit of non-professional time outside of work. And that showed me how important that is as well. Once we know each other better, we can communicate better and look out for each other within, especially within spaces where you really have to be working like on the fly and be able to adjust to things.
I love that. Humor, humility, and humanness. I'm gonna take that with me. Thank you. Andrea, how was it for you with developing professional relationships?
Yeah, so I don't want to be repetitive of my colleagues here, especially with time. So I'll keep it short. But you know, like people have said, when things are virtual, it's pretty difficult to build those professional bonds that often come easier when, you know, with a break in the office or like a quick chat in the kitchen. And in a virtual world, these things need to be done with intention and almost always scheduled in ahead of time, which can be really difficult because everyone has busy schedules. So for me, I was definitely fortunate enough that everyone on my team at Jefferson Center was fully vaccinated by the time I started. So I was actually able to go into the office at least one day a week. And that definitely, like Caitlin said, it helps to humanize the experience for me and get to know my coworkers better. And then also for my work on this team, my co-intern Katie and I developed and conducted qualitative research where we were looking to measure the level of burnout and self-care on each of the crisis response teams throughout Colorado. And so we did this by setting up Zoom interviews with each team's team lead. And this was a really cool opportunity, not only to just do the research itself, but to also get to know more about these people. And to really build that professional network that was kind of lacking before by connecting with all these leaders of various mental health organizations across Colorado. So even though, of course, there were challenges, technology, if there's no technology issues, you know, what is it? It still felt highly rewarding.
That's awesome. I think the key word on that one was the intentionality and realizing how much that's needed. Thank you. Hiba, tell us a little bit about how that went for you developing those.
Yeah, so I think even before the internships, I realized with the pandemic, I just have to be more proactive in communication across the board in my life. And one way that I did that with this internship, especially at Community Reach Center, and even with Mindfully Muslim, I was being really intentional to ask people about their lives outside of work, because I recognize that we're more complex and dynamic than just like that one identity that you might present with at work or internship. So I made a concerted effort to ask people how their families are doing and connecting with people on all levels of the system I was working in. So I got in really good with the front desk people, which, you know, they hold down systems like organizations. They're like the foundation. So I made those types of efforts to make sure I'm connecting with people and following up with them, not just asking once. And another thing that I think I did was take responsibility when I would make mistakes, because I think by owning up, you know, I opened myself up to getting feedback and growing, but also showing that I'm willing to take responsibility for my weight of the work in these different spaces and to help carry that because everybody was overburdened. And so I think just being more mindful of that also led me to be more open to like make more of a concerted effort to ask for help, consultation, in the process of learning more about my colleagues as people. So I think it was just that proactiveness that really was the core of the professional relationships I built.
That's awesome. The idea of being proactive and intentional, once again, great. I love all of that. So I think we have about a minute each for this next question. And I know it's a little early to reflect, but tell us a little bit of how you feel like you grew over your training and your internship, and a little bit about what your next steps might be following this placement or following this 2 years.
Yeah, so I was definitely challenged and introduced to a new way of approaching clinical work, because I've realized I am a clinician at heart, which was one of the gifts I got from this experience, is knowing where my interests lie and where they may not be as inviting for me to like explore. And I've not only grown as a clinician, but as a person as well, because I've been given this wonderful opportunity to learn how I can live my values and my ethics within really complex and overburdened systems that aren't always supportive towards minoritized and underserved populations. And I believe, you know, I'm still going to continue to do trauma work in the future. And I just really look forward to continuing to grow and like learning, because I don't think that's going to stop for me ever, because this field is always changing.
Thank you, Hiba. Andrea, what about you? What have you learned?
Yeah, so throughout these last 8 weeks, I definitely learned how to go with the flow more and be more present to what is currently needed without thinking in the past or thinking about the future too much. And after graduation, I will actually be working as a therapist in a correctional facility while working towards my Colorado licensure. And that will undoubtedly be a fast-paced environment. And I think that these skills about being fully present and going with the flow will absolutely be necessary and even come in handy with this career. And, you know, the work that I did these past 8 weeks were completely new to me. As, you know, Hiba also mentioned, I'm definitely a clinician at heart, and I don't see myself doing too much research in the future. However, it was still really awesome to get that opportunity to kind of try on research for size, see how it fits, and develop some skills that I probably wouldn't have gotten the chance to in a fully clinical role. So I think that even in this, you know, future clinical career of mine, I think the things that I learned from engaging in these experiences will for sure help me going forward.
Absolutely love that. I think it's just as important to learn what you are not as into as what you're into. So Caitlin, what were your lessons and what are your next steps?
Yeah, so I learned that I am less into clinical work than I thought. So I'm really looking more towards other spaces, including like policy focused, advocacy focused. I definitely have grown in my ability to work on a team throughout this time. And most of all, I think I've grown in my confidence within my own skills. And it's really taught me like my own worth within these spaces and what I might be capable of. And that's really exciting as I start my job hunt. Most of all, I had the opportunity to create an LGBTQ plus affinity group, a support group at RISE. And being able to do that really affirmed my passion for working with specifically LGBTQ plus and other minoritized populations. I definitely know I want to continue working in my career towards equity and mental health services, and hopefully focus on upstream interventions that can help to prevent further disparity. I'm going to be moving in a month to Los Angeles with my partner, so very excited, looking for jobs. But yeah, I'm just excited to see what comes next.
That's wonderful. I'm so excited hearing all of these. Madison, what's going on with you after this?
Yeah, so during my time at Devereaux, because I did stay on for the full 10 months since September when I started, I really got to hone my clinical skills in a way that just wouldn't have been feasible if I was working internationally. So I feel like I've really grown in my competency and confidence as a clinician, and also really sparked my interest in clinical work, because prior to this, I was more into thinking programmatically, and that research would be more my route. And now I'm really diving into clinical work, which has led me to my next step. I recently started working with a private practice neuropsychologist who works with people who have experienced TBIs and spinal cord injuries and PTSD, and kind of learning more about assessments in a way that I've never been introduced to before. But my eventual goal is to move on and get my PhD, so more school. And so this is really going to help prepare me for that.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Madison. Morgan, what are you looking forward to next?
Yeah, so I actually entered this program thinking I was going to do clinical work 100%. And I actually made the decision to leave a very clinical placement in order to do my 2 internships experiences over these past 8 weeks. And I'm so glad that I pushed myself out of my comfort zone to do that, because I've really learned that I do have a passion for the systems level work for, as Caitlin noted, this policy and advocacy route really is something that I'm very interested in pursuing after graduation, and as I do some job hunting. I definitely feel that my confidence and my passions and my abilities to set boundaries and engage in this self-observation, which has been so important to doing this work, has grown immensely over these past few years. And I'm really proud of completing this program in a really difficult time, and I'm proud of everybody here. And I just wanted to name that too. But I think all of these different lessons learned and impacts have really set me up for different success in whatever I end up doing, whatever route I take. But I'm excited to see where the journey leads after this. I hope to continue to branch out and examine these different areas of mental health and impact of systems.
That's awesome. Okay, I am so excited as someone who I met you guys just about a year ago, and I feel like I've seen, even in just little glimpses virtually, just how much you've grown. And I'm really excited to see this flow of the way things have happened, from really reframing what has been a harrowing year into some really productive learning. And I just want to open it up now to all of our attendees and our audience. If you have any questions for any or all of our students, fortunately, Claire Carroll just sent a message saying we have until 4:10 now. So that gives us a couple of more minutes. We probably fit in maybe 3 questions or so, depending on maybe 1 if everyone is answering those. You can either type your questions and I'll read them out, or you can unmute yourself and ask the students any questions you might have. Not all at once. All right, I think one of the things I'll ask is, if you are speaking to, and I know we had one here a second ago, if you were speaking to a student coming into the program in terms of how to make the most of their time here, what would you say in light of the internships that you've had and everything else?
I guess from my perspective, it's just being open to trying new things and not always just like automatically saying, oh, that's not for me, or it would never work out. I think it's really important to just go for it. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but at least you can say that you tried. And you might be surprised because I heard a lot of people on the panel saying, like, I came in for clinical work and that is not at all what I want to do anymore. And so I think that's like a really big lesson I learned as well. And if there's something that you want to do, just go for it. Like, just try it. Like, you might be surprised, you might be disappointed, but I think that's part of the learning process. And you'll just grow no matter what experience it is.
I love that. Thank you, Hiba. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Sometimes you say yes to things and you don't know how you're going to do them, but I always say yes and then figure it out as you go. So I really love that. Anyone else? What would you say? The student that was coming in.
I was just gonna branch off of what Hiba was saying and just say that it's okay to be uncertain and it's okay to like a lot of different things and have a lot of different interests. And that's something that I always thought, oh, I need to know just this one thing and have this one direct path. But it's definitely not a bad thing to be interested in a lot of different areas. So I think that branches off of what Hiba was saying too.
To add to that?
I would say in terms of at internships, sorry, Maddie, at internships, not being intimidated by coworkers, like being open to making friends with people who might be like a level ahead of you, might be licensed or getting their license, who have just like an abundance of knowledge to give to you about their experience, but also just friendship. And like, I made friends at my internship that I hope will be long lasting relationships. And if I was too intimidated to do that, it would have been very sad and I would have missed out. So yeah, I would just be open to relationships and friendships.
So what were you going to add?
Yeah, well, to highlight what Caitlin just said regarding an abundance of knowledge is that and there's so many situations that I truly felt overwhelmed with the amount of knowledge that surrounded me and the amount of knowledgeable people and experts in their field and just really how truly overwhelming it is to want to absorb it all and to respect yourself and understand that you physically can't, that you're going to be assigned 15 readings and it may be only possible to skim them. But that I feel like when it comes to absorbing knowledge, it's not so much like a sponge, but more like throwing wet spaghetti noodles on a wall. Some of it'll stick, but it's not all going to stay. And so save everything and anything that feels useful because there's so much amazing things out there that it's physically impossible to absorb it all.
I can definitely relate to that. A big part of my summer after I graduated from my PhD was putting in boxes all the handouts that I got from my 5 different practicum sites and internship sites and organizing everything and being like, I know everything I know is in these boxes and I can find it someday when I need it. So that's a really important thing to note, that like we do know a lot. And I will say to you students, definitely be brave and realize that you know more than you think you know. So as you go into your next steps, be unafraid to sit at the tables, to speak up, to open your mind, open your heart to all of the experiences that will come, and be surprised. So you'll surprise yourself with how much you have picked up. And I'm really excited to see you all do that. Do we have any more questions? We have about 2 minutes from anyone. Oh, here we have a question from Andrew Miller, who says, were there any policies or steps your internships took in response to the pandemic that you hope to continue after we return to normal?
So I briefly mentioned that we used to start with check-ins, but at our formal meetings, we would always start with checking in on the stress continuum. So from green to red, what color are you at, or a combination of colors, and why? And I just realized that opened it up so much to not only just bring our like humanness into the conversation, but also just like it's a lot easier to talk later in a meeting when you already said, oh, I'm green, I feel great today. It just brought so much like engagement to those meetings, and I really hope that that can continue in the future.
I think sorry, Hiba. I think just telehealth in general. Of course I love being in person, and I love being able to, there are certain things that you can't get over a Zoom telehealth session with a client, right? But I think that the accessibility that comes with being able to do things virtually is so great. And I hope that in some capacity that is still able to be offered like widespread, at least to have that option. Because I think that that's something, I think we were able to reach a lot of people that we haven't been able to reach before.
Andrea beat me to it. I was going to say something similar. But the other thing that I did want to mention was the creativeness that I've seen on the teams I've worked with of like trying to figure out how to do billing and like all this other stuff to get people's feet, like their foot in the door so that they can get services is like inspiring, because it would be like, oh, I found this one code that nobody's heard of and nobody's ever billed, but we can bill it for like 15 minutes. So let's start doing this too. And so it was great to see people working really hard to get people services and being more creative in that way. So I hope that continues, because I think that's something that maybe this field has been struggling with sometimes.
That's a wonderful way to wrap it up, Hale.
Well, just the dedication and the resilience that you demonstrate to continue on with the important work that you can have in front of you. I'm just very touched by that. So anyway, congratulations on managing it so well.
Yeah, and I know we're going to wrap up, and I believe Emily is going to help us do that.
Yeah, so for those of you who I didn't introduce myself to already in our panels, I'm Emily, as Judy said, another IDP student. And I just wanted to end our presentations by thanking you all again for taking the time out of your day to join us for the virtual event. I know it's not ideal, but it was really great to see everyone's faces here. I hope you really enjoyed hearing students' reflections on the interesting work we've all been doing. And if you haven't already, remember to check out those bio links for some more detailed information about everyone's placements. We can drop that in the chat again if you weren't able to track it. And then I just wanted to invite all the students to now go into a 5-minute break before our after party starts. And then everyone else can feel free to hop off the Zoom link and have a really good night.
Thanks, everybody.